This is WFUV, New York.
This is One on One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org.
Tonight I feel so far away from you. What did you do tonight? I'm driving my truck up and down the coast from north of Seattle to the Mexico line. Right now I'm in San Bernardino. All day long it was 95 degrees, but at least tonight I get to hear the golden voice of Vin Scully.
I've been stuck in this going no place desk job for too many months, and it's time to move on. If I quit and just try to do my paintings, I wonder if I could come up with the rent. I still root for the Yankees back east. I never did take to these local teams, but at least tonight I get to hear the golden voice of Vin Scully.
Live here for One on One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show. It's a special edition. We're celebrating the life of Vin Scully. Ryan Gregoire here, joined alongside by Sam Davis. Michael Calamari will be joining us as well. We'll be with you this evening live on 90.7 FM and YouTube live from 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. And Sam, the reason we're here and this entire show, it's all dedicated to celebrating the life of Vin Scully.
Vin Scully, an amazing life, 94 years old, obviously coming from the Bronx, born here, WFUV, founding the station. Everything that we're here for, everything that we are is through Vin Scully, and it all goes back to him here at WFUV, which is, it's an honor. I think I speak for both of us in that. It's very much an honor to be here and have the opportunity to speak on his life and what a life he lived. It's going to be difficult. I know 3 hours is a lot of time, but it's going to be difficult to fit his life into 3. I honestly don't think it is, because of how much that he's done, not just for FUV, not just for Fordham, not just for the Dodgers, baseball and society as a whole. And, you know, I'm just really honored to be here to speak on Vin Scully.
And before we get more into it, that voice you just heard at the top, that was Dan Byrne, the golden voice of Vin Scully. That was actually recorded in the studios of WFUV.
Right here. No, not right here. Well, right down the hall.
Yeah, right down the hall.
Right in the vicinity here.
So that's pretty cool, sticking to the Fordham roots. And on that kind of basis, we have a ton of guests this evening. People gave up their time, very generous with us to talk about Vin Scully. We'll run through the names right now. Bob Ahrens, Malcolm Moran, two Fordham staples in their own right.
WFUV staples.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Michael Kay, Post-Costas, Tony Reali, John Cirillo, Spiro Dedes, and Ryan Rucco. Sam, that's an all-time list. Those are some of the top pioneers, some of the top icons in the broadcasting sphere, and it's fitting that they joined to talk about Vin Scully.
Yeah, and I think, what struck me sitting down and talking to all these, amazing names that, like you said, we're really grateful of them taking the time to talk about Vin Scully, is that we feel a connection to them through Vin. And I think that just points to the fact that, obviously most of those names that you listed coming from WFUV, coming from Fordham, and that I think says a lot just about the connection you feel. A lot of these names, a lot of these people that I interviewed, I've never actually met before, but you just feel that sort of connection with them. And you feel sort of a pride in WFUV and a pride in the fact that it all goes back to one individual, and that individual is Vin Scully. And I think, we've seen, since Vin Scully passed away, a lot of outpouring of support and, a lot of reference to WFUV, to Fordham, to where he came from. He's, like I said, born in the Bronx. He grew up right next to the Polo Grounds. Everything he did at Fordham, attended Fordham Prep, really just, truly, I think made a mark here in the Bronx, here at Fordham, and then obviously going on, to the rest of his career, did unbelievable things for the Dodgers and for the game of baseball as a whole.
And there's two angles we'll try to take with the show, and you kind of brought them up. There's the Fordham aspect, the WFUV aspect. You talked about that pride. I've never felt more proud to be a Fordham Ram than when you talk about Vin Scully.
The last couple days, just, sitting down and really looking into the life of Vin Scully, and obviously I knew about him, but really sitting down and researching him, I felt that serious pride, to work for WFUV. I think it gives you when you think about where you came from and when you think about what it all goes back to, it makes everything that we do on a daily basis at the station even more important when it goes back to such an influential figure and such a figure that, I think just had a loving heart for the game of baseball, had a loving heart for everyone that he interacted with, and that's what we'll see with a lot of the guests as well. Just speaking to anyone that's ever met him, just the impact that he's had on their lives in addition to everything he's done, as a broadcaster and for the game of baseball as well.
And I don't know if there's a better person if you're talking to someone who's not from Fordham, to be, this is my guy. This is the guy that started all, Vin Scully. That name it holds so much weight. It means more. And we talked about that Fordham aspect. There's also the baseball aspect. This was the voice of the Dodgers, voice of baseball for 67 years. He really connects all of baseball. We talked about it the other day. From Sandy Koufax, perfect game, to Kershaw no-hitters, everything in between. He's been on the call for some of the most signature moments in the sport, and to hear his voice, to hear these calls, it's fitting, and it's a part of baseball history.
Yeah, every single big moment, it seemed that Vin Scully was on the call for it, and I think that was no coincidence. I think that showed just, how much of a presence he was, in the sports world as a whole, and you mentioned the fact that, he's kind of touched all sort of different fan bases. It's not just L.A., although he is incredibly important to L.A. and the Dodgers. San Francisco with the 49ers and that big call. The Mets with their World Series. Obviously the Yankees, Don Larson's perfect game. And the Braves as well with Hank Aaron. All of these calls, I think he really did unite not only baseball, but unite the sports world together. And the fact that he was just there for every perfect call, every perfect, just awesome games, and he nailed every single one of those calls. It just seemed like he had something at the ready for that moment, even though he couldn't have planned anything that happened. He was just ready to make that big-time call, and he did it. And I think, that says a lot about who he is, the fact that every, big sports moment that we think about, most of them go back to, who was on the call? It was Vin Scully.
You brought up something to me. It seemed like these calls found him, right?
Yep.
And there was almost like, not that he knew the future, but every single big call, he set it up to perfection. You could listening to the ninth inning of Sandy Koufax, perfect game. It was a magistry. It was absolute perfection. You felt like you were in the ballpark when I wasn't even 60 years out from being alive.
It was like he knew that those moments, and obviously a perfect game is a big-time moment, but it's like he knew that those would be played for, years and years later. And I think that is just what struck me when listening to these calls. Ryan, you and I, sat down and listened to that entire inning from Sandy Koufax for that perfect game, that last inning. And just how he sets the scene with the time, with the date, with the number of fans there. He did that with a number of calls, and that just shows, he knew how important these moments were. And I think as a broadcaster, to be able to have that awareness during that moment, to think, okay, this is going to be something that, is going to be played for a long time, that can put a lot of pressure on you to make the call. It didn't matter to him. He was able to still make that amazing call when the time came. And another thing that Vin did well, from the broadcast standpoint, is letting the crowd, come onto the air. And when he had to be silent, he was. Not enough broadcasters, know how to do that. Just give the crowd its right to, cheer when that big moment comes. Vin Scully did that to perfection. He found a way to just sit back, not say a word, let the crowd, make that noise, for whoever was listening. And that just made those moments, I think, just even more important, even more big, and just, that speaks to, technically, Vin Scully as a broadcaster just did an unbelievable job, in addition to everything else he was as a man and of course, a pioneer for WFUV.
Yeah, there is just so much to get to, and we're going to take a quick break. We're going to get into
Don't want to get ahead of ourselves.
Right.
We got a lot.
We're going to be joined with Bob Ahrens after the break, who needs absolutely no introduction to anyone in the Fordham and FUV community to know what he's meant. So he'll have some great stories, I'm sure, with Vin. They had a relationship there. So stay tuned for that and a ton more after a quick break.
The Whiz Kids had won it, Bobby Thompson had done it, and Yogi read the comics all the while. rock and roll was being born. Marijuana we would scorn. So down on the corner, the national pastime went on trial. We're talking baseball. Klazuski, Campanella, talking baseball. The man and Bobby Fella, the Scooter, the Barber and the Nuke. They knew them all from Boston to Dubuque, especially Willie, Mickey and the Duke. Well, Casey was winning, Hank Aaron was beginning, one Robbie going out, one coming in. Kiner and Midget Goodell, the Thumper and Mel Parnell, and Ike was the only one winning down in Washington. I'm talking baseball, Klazuski, Campanella, talking baseball. The man and Bobby Fella, the Scooter.
Welcome back to One on One. Michael Calamari here with Sam Davis, and we are now pleased to be joined by Bob Ahrens, former executive producer and sports director at WFUV. Bob, thanks so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure, guys. Nice to be with you.
So I want to, kind of start at the beginning with Vin Scully, and just start. Where did your relationship with Vin start, and how did that grow since first meeting him?
Okay, I first met Vin in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, when the Dodgers came in to meet the Yankees during the exhibition season. I was working as a producer for Gray Advertising, and they knew I was a baseball fan, so I got assigned the Yankee beat because this agency had someone who was sponsoring the games. So I was lucky enough to go to spring training, all the home games, and every Tuesday and weekend road game.
Bob, thank you so much for being with us. And I want to go through, and I'm sure you have a lot, but can you give me your favorite story with Vin Scully? Any sort of, moment or story for you that sticks out that you would like to share with everybody?
Oh, boy.
I'm sure you got a bunch. So, maybe you got to take a second to collect yourself to find the favorite one.
Yeah. Oh, boy. Yeah, I've got one. I've got one.
Okay, great.
When I first came to WFUV, somewhere a week or so before the baseball season, I decided I wanted to get Vin on the air, and and the only place for me to call him then was at the Dodgers. I mean, after that, I had his phone number and all his contacts, but and so I called the Dodgers. And I'm sitting in the newsroom, and this was on the third floor at Keating. We weren't down in the basement yet. And I wound up sitting in the newsroom. We had a PA system then, and into the newsroom comes Bob Ahrens, Vin Scully on the phone. You can imagine what newsroom went into dead silence. They now wanted to hear all of this. So I get Vin on the phone, explain what I want. I want to do an interview with him at the start of the baseball season. And his response to me is, okay, how about right now?
Did you do it? Did you do it at that moment?
No.
Okay.
No, because
okay.
I wasn't the one who. No, it's students who were going to interview Vin.
Got it.
And and there were no students from the sports staff in the newsroom at the time. Plus, I wouldn't have put someone on because they would have had no time to prepare. So I told Vin what the story was, and he said, okay. I said, give me a time when you can do it, and I'll have someone. And he gave me a time, and at that point, he gave me his, I think he gave me his home number because I think he was going to be home at that point, and we did it. And that was, and that was my first experience with Vin at WFUV.
Bob, you mentioned, Vin and WFUV. Can you just try and put into words for us how important Vin Scully was for WFUV sports?
Oh, boy. How important was Vin Scully as a broadcaster? How important was Vin Scully to the Dodgers? I mean, a magnificent person, as well as probably the best baseball announcer there ever has been. And just the pride. And then loved Fordham. He loved WFUV, and he gave us a decent amount of time considering all that he had to do. And he said, okay.
So, Vin, obviously, Vin was able to call World Series games at 25. He was the youngest to ever do that. He called Dodger games for 67 years, did that without a color commentator. Bob, can you kind of speak to how difficult that is to do as a broadcaster, and how Vin was really able to master his craft, in those number of years calling games for the Dodgers?
Yeah, well, when he was in Brooklyn, he did have a color guy. Because first he was the second banana. He came, and there was Red Barber and Connie Desmond.
Yep.
Doing the game. So Vin was the third banana in the group, and he had two good teachers. Red especially. The Vin by himself thing eventually happened in Los Angeles, but Vin knows how to talk. He knows how to tell stories, and he was able to fill the time and do the game. And it's hard enough to broadcast baseball, but to do all he did, and at that time in Los Angeles, they were starting. That was their first Major League Baseball team, and they started to play in the Los Angeles Coliseum. And I don't know if you know, guys, it was like a huge cavern of the ballpark. You were almost 70 rows from the field, and that was when the transistor radio was starting to come in. So there was a ballpark full of fans and transistor radio, and that stayed even when they moved to the new ballpark. So Vin was teaching everybody baseball.
Bob, as someone who's taught future broadcasters for a number of years, what did Vin do so special behind the mic, and what separated him from the other broadcasters at his time and even throughout his entire career commentating the Dodgers?
Oh boy. Vin had, all right. Well, all right. Let me go back. When I was broadcasting in New York, when I was growing up in New York, the major names, once Vin came, were Red Barber, Vin Scully, and Mel Allen. That's quite a triumvirate of announcers. If you're a baseball fan, you understand that. And Red and Mel were brought into the Hall of Fame together, and they were the first two baseball announcers in the Baseball Hall of Fame. Vin, and everybody worked with a partner. And Vin worked with a partner, I guess, until it was Don Drysdale passed away. And then, Vin is a storyteller. And he intermixes the game with stories, and it's hard to say, it's difficult enough to do the game without mixing the stories in. But, Vin, had that great voice, and the games in the Coliseum, they were all ears. They were learning baseball, and they were learning Vin. Does that answer the question?
I think it does,
I
Mike.
think that is a tremendous response to the question.
Bob, I have another question for you that, kind of another favorite question. I asked you about your favorite story, but what about on-air moment for Vin Scully? Do you have a favorite call or any sort of story he told? Like you mentioned, he told a lot of stories. Do you have any, favorite on-air moments for Vin Scully?
Oh, boy.
List them all if you want.
No. Remember, when Vin left Brooklyn, okay, I didn't hear him anymore. In those days, getting a broadcast from New York and Los Angeles was not exactly easy, and not exactly doable. Okay, and I remember sitting in the car at times and running the engine down in the motor, which my father didn't approve of. When teams were on, I would listen to baseball games from other cities. But in those days, you didn't have the internet. You didn't have the capability that you have now. You could get other games. Reception was sometimes good, sometimes it was bad. But once the Dodgers went to Los Angeles, I didn't hear Vin unless he was on a network. I mean, there were a lot of people from Brooklyn when Vin left, and then when the Dodgers left, picked up and went to Los Angeles. But I stayed in Brooklyn.
Bob, we talked a lot. Bob, we talked a lot about Vin Scully as the broadcaster, but what made Vin Scully such a special person outside of the booth?
Well, he was a very warm and thoughtful human being. I need to credit his father passed away when he was 7, so most of that credit would go to his mother. And it's like that old thing: you've got to be taught, and then was taught very well. After his father passed away, they moved from the Bronx to Brooklyn. Vin grew up a Giants fan.
Yeah, and I think you think back and about the story of Vin Scully from Fordham Prep days to Fordham University, and then to his 67 years with the Dodgers. What stands out about the longevity of Vin Scully? His ability to call games at the university level, and then take his broadcasting skills from the 50s all the way into the early 2010s.
Oh boy, Vin was a wordsmith. He knew how to tell stories. And and he learned a lot of what he did from Red Barber. Red was a great announcer, but Vin topped him, which wasn't an easy thing to do. And oh boy, give me that question again.
Just about his ability to call games not only in the 1950s, 60s, but be able to have a long career and call games into the 2010s.
Yeah, and at that point, those games were called only by him. He didn't have a partner.
Mm-hmm.
But the crowd for any sports announcer is an announcer's best friend, and Vin knew how to play the crowd. And remember, with these games, the audience, when he was at home, the audience was listening to him, okay, and reacting to what he was saying. And I think he loved the Dodgers. He had a way with words, and he was just not only a super broadcaster, but a super personality, a super person. Because one of the nicest people you would ever meet. In an industry where you can get a big ego. And all the time I knew Vin, I never saw an ego.
Bob, that's a great point. I think one of the words that Vin used to describe himself was humble, and that was something that I think he really prided himself in.
Yes.
Yeah, but obviously just shifting obviously to WFUV, I know it gives a lot of pride to us current members at WFUV that we come from something kind of bigger than ourselves, and things always go back to Vin. During your time as sports director at WFUV, did you think about that? Was that something that you I guess took pride in, or that you tried to convey to the students that hey this all goes back to Vin? Or how important I guess was Vin for you during your time here at WFUV, for this station as a whole, both past and present?
Well, Vin was a very, very important to FUV and the students. Vin loved Fordham. Vin loved FUV. He was there when FUV started. Okay, and and he loved it. He loved the campus and everything about it. He's basically the same. He's the same person. How important was it, for the students? Oh yeah, it's Vin Scully. He gave us plenty of interviews over the years. Okay, and if he couldn't do it when we called him, he always made sure that he would find the time to do it. So the students got to talk to Vin, and it was, I don't know, it's very important to the station, to the university, and to the students to have someone like Vin Scully, representing you, for the sports department. Look, Vin is only one. Vin was the first, and a Fordham man. But there's a lot of FUV people out there, and the alumni are very important to the station. And as you guys can attest, the alumni are around, and they help, and they advise, and it's a great thing for you guys.
Bob, one more question before we let you go. You mentioned how Vin Scully was so available for interviews, to be able to talk with all the trainees, everyone who's at WV, all the students. How important do you think that was, that Vin Scully, someone who went to Fordham University in the 1940s, was then making himself available for students well after he graduated? And what does that say about the person Vin Scully?
How can I put this? Like I said, Vin loved Fordham. He loved WFUV. He loved, you guys have a lot of workshops. Vin obviously wasn't in New York, and when he came in with the Dodgers, there wasn't time for him to come to the station and do a workshop. But over the time that I was there, he did 2 workshops on the phone. And I can tell you, the control room at the radio station was packed to the gills, as you would imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Hanging on every word. There wasn't a pin drop, and it took the first time we did it. It took a little bit of coaxing for the students to even ask them a question.
Yeah, I can imagine. I think that just is a testament to how great of a person he was and the legacy he left behind, and really the icon he was. Bob, thank you so much for doing this. We really appreciate all the stories and all the memories about Vin Scully.
Okay, you're very welcome, guys. Nice job.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Bob. And we will head to a quick break. On the other side of the break, we will be joined by Malcolm Moran, the founder of this very show, One on One. But before that, a break right here. Stick around on YouTube Live and 90.7 FM.
Shoes. Man, I dig those rhythmic blues. I was a lonely teenage bronc and buck with a pink carnation and a pickup truck. But I knew I was out of luck the day the music died. I started singing Bye Bye Miss American Pie. Drove my Chevy to the levee, but the levee was dry. Them good old boys were drinking whiskey and rye and singing, this'll be the day that I die. This'll be the day that I die. Now for 10 years we've been on our own, and moss grows fat on a rolling stone. But that's not how it used to be. When the jester sang for the king and queen in a coat he borrowed from James Dean, and a voice that came from you and me. Oh, and while the king was looking down, the jester...
Welcome back to One on One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show, and this special edition of One on One as we honor and remember the life and legacy of Vin Scully. And as we keep on moving along with the show, Sam, we're going to bring in another guest. Now joining the show is the founder of this show, like I mentioned, One on One, Malcolm Moran. Malcolm, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me. Even though it's such a sad occasion, it's a very special one.
And I think it gives us all a chance to reflect on how much he meant to everyone who tuned into Dodger games, anyone who listened to him, and for us especially, what he meant for WFUV. So I kind of want to start there. For you, what did Vin Scully mean for Fordham and WFUV, and what did that mean to him?
Well, for me personally, when I arrived at school, he had graduated just over 20 years before, which to a 17-year-old is forever, but in the grand scheme of things is not all that long. And so what that represented to me and to those of us who were at the station at the time is that this business was attainable. We identified with his success, not that we would be like him, but that someone who had walked that hallway when it was on the third floor of Keating Hall could have such remarkable success and could be so respected. And so that's what it meant for me going back to that. And at the time, if you were a New Yorker, the frustrating thing was that we didn't have access to his craft because this was before he had the Game of the Week opportunities on NBC. And the only time you got to hear him in the New York area would be when the Dodgers got in the World Series, which happened in 63, 65, and 66 when NBC would include the hometown broadcasters in the national telecast. But once the Dodgers were no longer in the World Series on that kind of regular basis, we didn't get to hear him. And so there was a long time when the audience in his hometown didn't have a chance to listen to him.
Malcolm, thank you so much for being with us. It feels, very, very awesome to have the founder of One-on-One here on One-on-One. Looking at that, what kind of influence did Vin have kind of in the early years of One-on-One as you got the show going? And it was, what kind of influence did Vin Scully have on starting out One-on-One?
Well, in the early days of the show, he was so respected at that point. He was so established in the industry, not just for his craftsmanship, which has been well documented, especially in the last few days, but because of his professionalism, his kindness, with me and many others. I mean, I remember introducing myself to him when I was with the New York Times in my first year writing a feature about the Dodgers. And I remember being so nervous. I mean, it was kind of like when you would rub the palm of your right hand against the hip of your pants before you shook hands because you were so nervous. But he would immediately put you at ease by finding something to connect with and making the conversation about you rather than him. And that has also been well documented in the last few days. How many times young broadcasters, young reporters would sheepishly come up to him and he would put them at ease. And there are generations of people in this business who have looked up to him for that personal side every bit as much as his brilliance.
Malcolm, I was going back and I was reading an article from the Fordham Ram, and it mentioned how you make comparisons between WFUV and other stations and how you just joke and say, we have Vin Scully, checkmate. What does that say about the legacy of Vin Scully and just the icon that he was?
Well, part of it is the timing of it. When this strange new part of broadcasting called FM radio, which in those days very few people had access to, became something that the university decided to invest in. And you think back to the vision in 1947 of making a commitment to invest in this new technology, and he was part of the very beginning of it. And his growth was an important part of the early years of the station and its presence in the New York market. And so as his career grew and then he had a national presence, I mean, to me, that is the answer to any question of which university has the greatest presence in that industry, because his success, both professionally and personally, has defined that industry as a storyteller.
Malcolm, you mentioned, Vin as a person and, how he was able to connect with everybody he met. And I've heard so many stories about how everyone in the industry was so nervous to meet Vin and how he calmed everybody down and made everybody feel welcome. And just that speaks to who he was as a person. But as a broadcaster, I'm very curious, what did you, hear from Vin that stuck out for you compared to every other broadcaster in terms of the storytelling, in terms of, his delivery and everything that made Vin a broadcaster? What stuck out for you for Vin Scully?
Well, in the 16 years that I've been teaching this, the story that I've told students many, many times is long before anybody was talking about crossing platforms in different formats of storytelling. I remember being in a bookstore and finding this thick book that was an anthology of great baseball reporting. I mean, this must be in the late 70s or early 80s. And as you would imagine, most of the entries were old newspaper or magazine stories about the game. But there was one entry that was different, and it was a transcript. And you can find it online within a few seconds now, but it was not accessible then. It was a transcript of the radio broadcast on September 9th, 1965, when in Dodger Stadium, Sandy Koufax took a perfect game against the Chicago Cubs to the ninth inning. And this entry in an anthology of great baseball reporting was the ninth inning broadcast. There was no TV, and it was his description. And it read as if he agonized over almost every word. And I remember getting this book and reading it, and I didn't know if I should be insanely jealous or just in awe of his command of the language, his ability to put things into context, the richness of his description. I mean, it's basically something that every aspiring writer or broadcaster should read, because it possesses all the elements of great reporting. And the fact that it was just something that moment by moment became the spoken word is still awe-inspiring to me.
Malcolm, when you reflect on the life of Vin Scully, is there a favorite moment in whether it was in the booth calling a game or just in your communication with him that you reflect on the most and you remember the most?
Well, personally, one thing that was pretty funny that comes to mind is that late in that 88 season, in the last week of the regular season, the Dodgers had clinched the NL West, and the remaining games would be insignificant, except for one, when Orel Hershiser had a chance to tie Don Drysdale's record for consecutive scoreless innings, a record that was once viewed as unattainable. And going into the game, the buildup was that Hershiser has a chance to tie the Drysdale record. And not only did he tie it, but when the Padres matched zeros and the game went scoreless to the 10th inning, now Hershiser has a chance to break this once unattainable record. And I was covering the game in San Diego, and I'm listening to the broadcast as I'm sitting in the press box, and Vin, rising to the occasion as usual, uses the device that he had used several other memorable times when he includes the time of the evening. It's 9 whatever in San Diego as part of his description. And I still get chills just thinking about it, because that, I mean, obviously I understood and recognized the significance of the occasion and the record, but hearing his description in real time showed me how important it was. So obviously, Hershiser sets the record. Drysdale, who was then part of the Dodger broadcast crew, was waiting for him in the dugout after he set the record, and it was just a wonderful moment. But then the game keeps going because it's still scoreless. And between innings, Vin, as he did more often than most broadcasters, would come and visit the press box to commiserate or to ask a question or just to get some information. And so now the drama has passed, and now it's a game that really doesn't mean much because the Dodgers have already clinched, but it's still going on. And I mean, I can still hear his voice in that rich tone of his. He's wondering out loud now, is this game ever going to end? Because now we're here and the drama is over, and it's now just another game that the Dodgers are enduring on their way to the playoffs. So, and I think back to how much fun that night was for all kinds of different reasons.
Malcolm, that's awesome. Just one more, from me here, circling back, of course, to Fordham. Can you kind of try and put into words the impact that Vin Scully had on WFUV and on Fordham University?
Transformational. I mean, that's probably only the beginning of the proper description, but the fact that his development coincided with the emergence of the station itself. And the fact that because of his professionalism, because of the way he developed his craft, and probably most important, because of the way he treated people, there's no broadcaster that's ever going to be recognized on that level for all of those things. And any of us that have been able to cross paths with him will always be grateful for those moments.
Malcolm, we really appreciate you giving up your time talking about Vin Scully and joining the show.
It's an honor to be part of this conversation, and thanks for all you do.
Thank you so much,
Thank you so much. And that was once again Malcolm Moran, the founder of this very show, One-on-One. And Sam, that was a great conversation, but the conversations keep coming, and we got a great one coming up next.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we just have to, Malcolm Moran is another guy we have to be very thankful for everything that he's done for
this station. And
if
if you really think about it, we can't have this show.
Think about what we're doing right now is One-on-One, and obviously that's thanks to him. That's thanks to Vin Scully, of course, as well. But just very, very cool to talk to somebody like that who obviously knew, both Bob Ahrens and Malcolm Moran both knew Vin Scully very well. Amazing just to hear the stories. And obviously we didn't get a chance to meet him, but just to, I can't help but smile just even hearing any stories about interactions with Vin just because of the person he was. And just, like I said to Malcolm, we heard so many people. Michael Kay said it as well, which is the interview we'll get to next. Michael Kay said it, Malcolm said it, felt so nervous meeting Vin, and then Vin just calms you down and just makes you feel, just like I would say, very important, and kind of flips the conversation onto you and finds a way to connect with you. And that's what, just like good people with a good heart, and that's what Vin was, that's what he was able to do with all these people, which is really, really incredible.
Yeah, you get the sense from all these interviews we've had that you're going to hear throughout the show that Vin was just as incredible of a human being as he was a broadcaster.
And that's why we celebrate, and I think we'll talk about that later on, and obviously Vin, simply on the broadcast side of things, you can talk about so much, who he was and how amazing he was, but then you have to talk about as a person, who he was and how he carried himself, and that is ultimately, I think, something that everybody can take inspiration from. Not everybody can be Vin Scully, the broadcaster, but people can carry themselves like Vin Scully did, and I think that is a huge inspiration for all of us here.
And you hear the way Malcolm Moran talked about Vin Scully as someone who transformed Fordham University, and Vin Scully being one of those first broadcasters, someone that really paved the way for everyone at WFUV. Malcolm Moran, someone who started One-on-One, and that the legacy of that being New York's longest-running sports culture, where we are right now. And after Vin Scully and after Malcolm Moran came a series of Fordham broadcasters that we now know, and you think about Michael Kay and Mike Breen. We're going to hear from Michael Kay next, and that's a great interview to hear about how much Vin Scully meant for him and his thoughts on Vin Scully's impact on the baseball world, the broadcast world, and especially Fordham.
to honor the memory of Harry Carey. And to quote Harry, let me hear you. A one, a two, a three. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jacks. I don't care if I ever get back. So root for the Cubbies. If they don't win, it's a shame. For it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game. Ah, you're great.
On one for the special edition celebrating the life of Vin Scully. And we're joined now with Yankees broadcaster Michael Kay. Michael, thank you for joining. We'll just get right into it, though. You know, you recently wrote something in New York Post I want to talk about. You talked about meeting Vin in 1999, right before the MLB season that year. Can you kind of just walk us through what that experience was like and what it was like knowing Vin Scully on a personal level?
Well, I had never met him before that time. And the Yankees were in LA to have an exhibition game against the Dodgers before the 1999 season started. And I was thinking about it for days. I wanted to meet this guy so badly, you know, the Fordham connection, the fact that he's the gold standard for broadcasters. And I'm pacing back and forth. How was I going to introduce myself? And I saw Keith Olbermann, who's a friend of Vin Scully, and I know him very well. And he just said, "What's up?" And I said, "Well, I'm trying to think of a way to introduce myself to Scully." He goes, "I'll do it. No problem." And Vin could not have been nicer. And I said, "Nice to meet you, Mr. Scully." He said, "No, please call me Vin." And I took pictures with me, and we spoke for a long time about the Fordham connection, about both of the teams that we covered. And he was everything that you'd want him to be, and that you would hope that your hero would be when you get to meet him. He was just great.
Going off that kind of, Michael, I mean, we all, you know, have heard from Vin Scully as the broadcaster, but what made Vin so special as a person?
You know, it was just that he always seemed like he had time for people. And because Vin Scully was a stop in the press box for every writer and broadcaster that came through. I wasn't the only one that felt like that about Vin Scully. Everybody did. So if the Mets came through, well, guys like Mike Puma, who's also an FUV alum, they wanted to talk to Vin Scully, Kevin Kernan. You could go up and down the list of the broadcasters. And he always had time, and he was always pleasant, and he was always friendly. He had great respect for the print media as well. A lot of electronic media doesn't have that same kind of respect. I've never seen him, when I was around him, ever be rude to anybody, always have time. He always has time for somebody. And it's not just a cursory hello. He actually says, you know, he kind of sings that hello greeting. Well, hello, how are you? I mean, just, he made you feel very, very, very special. So, you know, people say, well, what do you take away from him broadcasting wise? Well, I can't do what he does. I don't have the verbal dexterity or the skill set to do what Vin Scully does. I don't think any broadcaster does. But I do take away that when I meet people in public, I try to be as nice and as accommodating as you could possibly be, because that's just a small price to pay for the you know, the blessing that you have at the job that you have.
You brought it up before, and I wanted to ask you about the Fordham aspect when it comes to Vin Scully and just his impact on Fordham and WFUV as a whole. What comes to mind to you?
Well, he was part of the group that actually started WFUV in the late 40s when he was a student. You know, he played center field for the Fordham team for a couple of years and then left and decided to pursue a broadcasting career. And I just think that everybody that walks through the doors of WFUV, they know that this is the guy that came before them. He's the guy that laid the groundwork for everybody to be successful, and you want to honor that legacy. It's just amazing. And I wrote a story, you know, that story in the Post that you referenced earlier, that if you have a playful argument with a Syracuse grad, and you know, you want to play the let's compare, you know, people that have come out of, you know, Newhouse and come out of FUV. If you're a Fordham grad, I mean, you've got the card. You just play Vin Scully, you drop the mic, and you walk away. They can't top Vin Scully. And there've been some great broadcasters that have gone to Syracuse, but Vin Scully went to Fordham. That's something that we always have. That's something that we can always be proud of. And to this day, I'm just proud that I'm part of that lineage that he started way back in the 40s.
Part of what makes Vin Scully so impressive is obviously the ability of him to call games with no color commentator. What made him able to do that so well? And could you ever picture even yourself as a broadcaster doing something like that so consistently?
I guess I could try to do it for a game or two, but to do it over a 162 game season, I just think it would be exhausting. But he probably did some analysts a very big favor. I mean, you're going to pale in comparison when you're on the air with him. But I think that the reason he did it wasn't because of ego, but if you listen to innings of his broadcast, he was setting things up. I mean, he was building stories and weaving in play by play, and to have another voice have to go in there kind of would, serve as a blockade almost to what he was trying to do. Again, it's very, very difficult. And I'm flabbergasted that he was able to work alone, in his 90s, before he retired. I mean, it's just hard to believe that you would have that kind of energy. But the reason he was able to do it, he had this breadth of knowledge. He was incredibly bright, obviously from the Jesuit education he got at Fordham. And, he could tie stories, Jackie Robinson and Gil Hodges, to a game that he was broadcasting with Yasiel Puig in the lineup. So he was amazing. I don't think that anybody could do that because none of us have that kind of reservoir of information that he had, and none of us could present it the way that he presented it.
We're joined now with Michael Kay, celebrating the life of Vin Scully. And another thing you mentioned in that article in the Post was you don't just go up to royalty and say what's up, but you said, well, Vin was royalty, and that's exactly what you did. So kind of wanted to just ask about that. And what about Vin do you think is so unique when comparison to other kind of legends and icons?
You know what? I guess maybe it's for, the three of us and people that want to make a living in this business. And you look at that person who was, with us at that time, and he's everything that we aspire to be successful the way he's been successful, to be successful in a classy manner where you treat people the right way. I mean, he just had such a regal bearing about him. And it wasn't off-putting at all. It was almost welcoming. His arms were wide open for anybody that wanted to talk to him. And I think that for him, Fordham meant something. Fordham was a really, really big deal. So if you just dropped the Fordham card on him, you were further allowed into the inner sanctum. It was just amazing. So I just think that people looked at him. I mean, how many people have that kind of a connection all the way back to, the beginning of baseball? If you do the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, I mean, he really was able to touch the entire length of professional baseball. And then you have an opportunity to actually talk with him. We can't talk with Connie Mack. We can't talk with John McGraw. We can't talk to those iconic people in baseball history, but Vin Scully was the thread through the fabric of baseball. And we had a chance to actually have conversations with him and pick his brain. I mean, I did an interview with him on Yes, when the Yankees were out there playing the Dodgers in the Interleague game in 2013. He was unbelievable. I mean, one of my great regrets, guys, is that I never got a chance to have him on center stage, where I could have had an hour, it could have been 2 hours, just to have him tell all the stories, because the stories are endless and they're fascinating and they're so interesting, and they apply to today as much as they apply to yesterday. So, I mean, there's so many angles why he was special, but I could just tell you he's special to me because I just have a reverence for people that have done it at such a high level for such a long time, and also the Fordham connection.
Michael, is there a certain Vin Scully call or moment that, kind of resonated with you the most in the booth, or anything that you remember in particular from his on the air, those big time moments?
Well, there's so many of them. Obviously, people always come back to Game 6 in 1986. It was a picture perfect call of the Mookie Wilson ground ball. But I look at the call that he made for Hank Aaron's 715th home run. That was magnificent. First, he calls a home run. Then the story goes that he got up from his seat and went to the back of the booth and had a cup of coffee and just let the crowd, carry it and the pictures carry it. And then he came back and he made that incredible statement about a black man breaking, an iconic player's record in the Deep South and getting a standing ovation. I don't think a lot of us could pull that off. He was able to pull it off beautifully. with the perfect words. And I think that that's probably his crowning call. But, as an aside, take a look at the call of the catch, Montana to Clark. That was pretty special as well. He could not, it wasn't just baseball he was great at. He was great with football, great with golf, actually did really great stuff with tennis as well. I don't think there was anything the guy couldn't do.
Now, last question for you here, Michael. Again, appreciate you taking some time. We've brought it up a few times how he was able to connect something from the 1950s to 2016, whatever it may be. How do you think during that whole, 67 years of broadcasting, he was able to stay true to himself, not change up his broadcasting style? When you look at what the world was in 1950 compared to when he ended, it was a different place. So how do you think he was able to do that through all, the years?
I think he just had the courage of his convictions. I've been reading so much stuff on him the last couple of days, and he actually did say that he changed his style a little bit at the beginning. He was a little bit more of a yeller, and he got too excited and things like that, and he didn't like the way it sounded. I just think that once you have the years in, then you almost become a little bit untouchable, and then he could do what he wanted to do, and there wasn't going to be an executive or suit that would have the nerve to actually tell him not to do it his way. So I think he gained power over time where, if he felt comfortable doing something, he did it. If he didn't feel comfortable doing something, he didn't have to do it. I mean, he fought back a lot on that stuff because broadcasts the way they are now are completely different than the way they were even in the 70s. There's so many things that you have to do that are sponsored, and obviously the excitement level is a little bit higher and things like that. But Vin Scully didn't have to do that because he had an entire state behind him in California, and obviously Los Angeles, he was an absolute god. And over time, with the advent of satellite radio and things like that, and the Major League Baseball package, and all of us got a chance to enjoy him in his later years as well, and he got even a new following. So again, I just think that he was so exceptional at what he did that if anybody tried to tweak him, the person that was trying to tweak him would look like the fool. So Vin Scully had what we all want, and he got it over a period of time. And that's just the power of being there and being there a long time and being untouchable. And frankly, nobody should have ever tried to change him because he really was the perfect broadcaster.
Michael, one last time, thank you so much for taking some time with us to talk on the special edition about Vin Scully.
Of course. Thank you. Thanks for having me, guys.
We'll be right back here. This is WFUV, New York. Back here on One-on-One, getting into the second hour of this special 3-hour tribute show for Vin Scully. And Mike, Michael Kay was just on the show. He said a lot about Vin Scully. We've had a lot of great guests so far, but one thing that stuck out to me was this guy, he calls games for the New York Yankees. He's called some of the biggest games. He's met the biggest players in the sport, but he was nervous meeting Vin Scully, and I think that just shows the impact that he's had on the broadcasting
And he's
industry.
a larger-than-life figure. You think about Vin Scully, you think about the voice, you think about how he's able to tell stories. It almost doesn't feel real that someone that amazing of a broadcaster could be standing in front of you and meeting for the first time. Unfortunately, we never had that chance, but someone like Michael Kay, a great broadcaster, thinking about how great he is, he was still nervous that first time. It's really amazing to hear that.
And this was after he'd called World Series at this point, 1999. This is the middle of the Yankees dynasty. He's met some of the all-time titans in the sport, but it's Vin Scully, who he's too afraid to even go up with, has to get Keith Olbermann to introduce him. Just an unbelievable story from someone who, the voice of the New York Yankees right now, it holds the weight of Vin Scully. He's not just a normal broadcaster, but then when you talk about, you don't go up to royalty and say hi, It's exactly what you do with Vin because that's the kind of person he was on top of the broadcast.
And when they meet for the first time, he says, "No, you call me Vin." And I think that just shows you what kind of person he was, that he was welcoming and that he was having those conversations. Even if he didn't know you, he was going to treat you like a friend. And I think that's what, made Vin Scully so great. And when you take him outside of the booth, he's still just as great as a person.
And that is really because having time for everyone when you are Vin Scully, you are, at the pinnacle of your craft. You're calling every big game. But it didn't matter if you were Michael Kay or you were just, a boy in the stands. He was going to make time for you. Time in and time out. Everyone we've talked to, they've, brought this up. Vin would always make time for you, even when he is so busy as he was.
Yeah, and I think you think about what Vin Scully was able to do. Not only was he able to make time for everyone, but he had a super hard job as a broadcaster. He was a one-man booth for a lot of those 67 years in the Dodgers. Mostly in Los Angeles, he was in that one-man booth. And you talk about Michael Kay, how he said, he thinks he could maybe do it for a couple games, maybe 3-4 games, but over a 162-game season for as long as Vin Scully did it. That's how great of a broadcaster he was, and through all of that preparation he needed to do, through all those games he called, he still made time for everyone, and then that's truly amazing to hear.
And hopefully we'll be joined with, another icon in this industry in Bob Costas. In a second, I'm sure he'll have a very interesting perspective. Not being a Fordham guy, we've talked a lot about that, and I think that still is a really interesting aspect of the show. Just being Fordham, having that pride that Vin Scully is almost the godfather of your station, it just means more when that's the name that's attached to it.
Yeah, and I think how much Vin Scully has meant to Fordham, but he's also meant so much to the game of baseball, to broadcasting as a whole, and I think that's why he transcends the university to everyone he touched as a Dodger broadcaster, as a broadcaster in baseball as a whole, attaching his name and his voice to so many of baseball's famous moments, and that's why you don't really need to be from Fordham to be able to come on air, come on 90.7 FM and one-on-one and tell stories about Vin Scully, because that's how great of a broadcaster he was, and that's how much of a legend he really is.
And speaking of himself, we do have Bob Costas now on the line. Bob, this is Ryan. Thank you so much for taking some time with us to talk about the impact of Vin Scully.
Hey guys, how are you? Now, being on WFUV and talking about the Fordham legacy, I understand you're talking to a Syracuse guy, but the one school that can rival Syracuse, maybe not in volume, we got a very, very long list, but when you got Vin Scully at the top of your list and you got Mike Breen and others, you're right there, Michael Kay. You're right there. So, you have rivalries on the field and on the court. I don't know if it's a rivalry, but if you got to rank them 1, 2, somewhere in there, I guess it's Syracuse and Fordham, right?
It's a friendly rivalry, I would say.
Yeah.
It helps push each other. And so I want to, get started here. There's so many different ways we could go. But overall, when you look at Vin Scully's impact on the game of baseball, what comes to mind for you?
Well, I don't think this is hyperbolic to say all the great players that Vin Scully has broadcast games involving those players, none of them, and I'm well aware of who they are. We're talking about Willie Mays and Henry Aaron and Jackie Robinson, of course, and Mickey Mantle in World Series games that Vin called, and everybody through the present day. None of them were better at what they did than Vin Scully was at what he did. He was every bit as good a broadcaster as the greatest of them were baseball players. And here's the difference between Vin and any of them. None of them lasted nearly as long. None of them lasted even a third as long in their careers as Vin Scully did in his 67 years. It's not just the longevity, which is impressive enough, but the team with which he was associated, starting with the Brooklyn Dodgers, one of the most fabled teams in all of American sports history, Jackie Robinson's Dodgers, the Boys of Summer Dodgers, and then on to Los Angeles and virtually introducing Major League Baseball to Southern California. And the Dodgers have been a consistently interesting and contending team over that period of time. So from 1958 until 2010, only one primary voice of the Dodgers. The entire history of the franchise in Los Angeles during that period of time, Vin Scully was the voice. And that's the difference. Will Sandy Koufax, who's still with us, thankfully, will Sandy Koufax's name always be remembered? Yes. But since 1966, it was just a memory because that's when his career ended. But Vin Scully was not only nostalgic every time you heard him, but he was present. His broadcasts every day and every night were a combination of a news bulletin about that day or night's game, but also a flashback to every game you'd ever heard him broadcast, or every game that your dad or mom or grandparents ever took you to. No one can match Vin's ability. He's the greatest broadcaster I've ever heard. And I say that as a considered statement. And I know and have worked with and observed the greatest of the great, Al Michaels and Dick Enberg and on and on. I don't want to slight anybody. But if you have to pick one, if you have to put somebody's head above just a little bit above the others on Mount Rushmore, that's Vin Scully. But when you combine his superlative ability with the history that he spans and the longevity, there has never been another like him, including his mentor, Red Barber, including Mel Allen. And Red and Mel were the first two broadcasters to go into the broadcasters' wing of the Baseball Hall of Fame, and that was fitting. None who preceded him, none of his contemporaries, and given all the circumstances, none who follow him will ever be able to equal him. You know, they say about somebody, he's a once-in-a-generation person, a once-in-a-lifetime person. When it comes to baseball broadcasting, I say this with assurance, even though I won't be around eventually to verify it. Vin Scully was a once-and-forever broadcaster. There will never be another to equal him in baseball.
Bob, Michael Calamari here. Thank you so much for joining us. You talk about how Vin Scully was so great as a broadcaster, and I think about the artistry that Vin displayed during his calls, you know, Koufax's perfect game in 1965. How do you begin to explain the impeccable artistry that he displayed during those calls and so many more?
Well, you have to start out just with the talent he was blessed with. His command of language is almost uncanny, matching to the pace and rhythm of the game of baseball. He was so perfectly in sync with it. And then the instrument he was blessed with. Many broadcasters have very good voices. Vin's was not only distinctive, it was among the most pleasing voices in broadcast history. It was simultaneously exciting when it needed to be, but also comforting and soothing. And he was a wonderful storyteller. He worked at his craft. He certainly understood the dynamics of it. He understood when to speak and when not to speak. He just got all of it. So put it all together, it's like a golfer who had every club in the bag. You know, some guys are the best off the tee, or the best on the green, or the best short game. He mastered every club in a baseball broadcaster's bag. Plus, he was very good at other sports, too. He was very good on golf. He was very good on football. But baseball was the game to which he was most appropriately married.
Now, you've talked about, and I don't know how much it was a joke, how serious it was, that when Vin was telling a story, nobody ever lined into a double play. Can you kind of just go into detail how special that storytelling ability was?
Well, his storytelling ability was fabulous. And he just spin the yarn with the very best of them. And he was able to do it largely because, with the exception of the network games with Joe Garagiola, and they were a very good pair, and they adjusted to each other very well. But apart from that, most of his career on television and radio, Vin worked alone. So he was able to weave those stories in, knowing when he was going to pause, or just toss in a parenthetical aside, there's a ground ball to shortstop. So he was able to control that entire situation. But simply having that control doesn't mean that you'll do it as masterfully as Vin did. So there's that. He was just a wonderful storyteller. Plus, having been around as long as he was, and having experienced firsthand not just the events on the field, but his relationships with players and other people around the game, other broadcasters, executives, managers, writers, whatever it might be, he just had a treasure trove of stuff in his memory, and he could render it better than anyone ever has.
Bob, do you have a favorite story about Vin Scully? And if not a favorite, maybe one that just resonates with you?
Well, this one resonates with me because I was involved in a small way personally. Some 30 years ago, I was interviewing the great musician Ray Charles for a magazine piece on NBC. And at the end of this interview, Ray says to me, "You know who I'd really like to meet?" And I'm thinking, "You're Ray Charles. You're a genius in your own right. You're acclaimed everywhere. You've been everywhere, done everything. You can meet anybody you want. Who could it possibly be?" "Who is it, Ray? Who do you want to meet?" He said, "I would love to meet Vin Scully." He said, "Bob, you have to understand. To me, the picture means nothing," because Ray Charles, of course, was blind. To me, the sound is everything. And these are his words exactly. He said, Vin's broadcasts are almost musical. Could you introduce me to Vin Scully? I said, well, yeah, I'm sure I could arrange that. So eventually, we got Ray to Dodger Stadium. I called Vin and explained the situation to him. And Vin, as usual, was wonderful and gracious. And here's Ray Charles as acclaimed at what he did as Vin Scully was at what he did. But when Vin walked into the room, almost on cue, and said, hello, Ray, my name is Vin Scully. What a pleasure to meet you. Ray Charles lit up like a little kid. He almost trembled with delight. And Vin was very appreciative of Ray's accomplishments, but you could tell that it was not an equal exchange. Ray was more thrilled to be around Vin. Vin was, of course, respectful and appreciative. It's Ray Charles, after all. But Ray was like a kid in a candy store.
Now, that story perfectly just personifies how unique Scully was. And just one more question for you, Bob. Really appreciate you taking some time. Another way he was unique was the broadcast ran through him, not necessarily a director. Just wondering how rare to see is that in today's broadcasting world?
Well, that's a point that I've made over the last few years when people have asked me about Vin. And to me, it's been obvious for a long time, the last 20 years of his career, when many of us would stay up late on the East Coast, to watch a Padre-Dodger game, primarily just to hear Vin call it. Modern broadcasts of every sport can be somewhat cluttered. The technology keeps advancing, and if you got a toy, it's the natural human impulse to use it. So I'm talking about guys in the truck. No matter how good they are, they got a bunch of graphics, they got a bunch of replays, you got a bunch of camera cuts. But if you watch the Dodger game over the last, in the 21st century we're talking about now, those broadcasts had a pace that suited Vin. They were directed and produced, in effect, from the inside out. Usually the broadcaster is following the pictures and appropriately trying to put a caption beneath those pictures. But they were following Vin. There was never an extraneous replay, never an unnecessary graphic. There wasn't a pitch box. They didn't show a bunch of graphics that indicate how many home runs this guy hit to left field and how many to center and how many to right, just to show off the bells and whistles. Why get in the way of Vin Scully? Why force him to acknowledge something that he didn't ask for on the screen that would only truncate something much better that he was in the midst of doing? Now, would they take a picture of some kid with an ice cream cone and the ice cream smeared all over his face? Of course they would, because they knew that Vin loved that, and he put a great caption beneath it because that was just part of what he did. But those broadcasts never got in his way. And anyone in that truck who was dumb enough to think that they were the star of the broadcast and not Vin Scully would not have been around long. Not because Vin would show him the door, but because somebody else would show him the door. Because Vin was the guy. The reason you tuned in to the Dodgers was, A, to watch the Dodgers play, and not far behind, to listen to Vin Scully.
Bob Costas joining us on One-on-One. Thank you so much once again for taking some time with us.
Thank you, guys. All the best.
Thank you so much, Bob.
It. And Mike, just, before we go to break here, that's Bob Costas talking. So that's obviously an icon in this sphere. To hear just the stories, one, that Ray Charles story about Scully.
That blew me away.
Unbelievable. Yeah. I'm sitting back here just, wow. Just absolute wow. And the way he talks about him, undeniably the greatest broadcaster ever. It's crazy, but it's not, because everybody would agree, and that's just, again, a testament to Scully.
And I think it's the respect that everyone has for Vin Scully. Michael K., Bob Costas, everyone that we interviewed for this show, they all held that same level of respect for Vin Scully, and it's truly amazing to see. And with every story we get, it's more certified how great of a person he was and the effect he had on everyone that listened to him. And it's amazing that we get to unpack those stories on this show, and it's truly terrific for both of us and anyone listening or watching.
Maybe it's on us at this point for not expecting those kind of things, because we've done so many of these, we should.
Yeah, I mean, the Ray Charles story really blew me away. And I think when Bob Costas was talking about all the high technology, and I remember, back in the early 2010s when we had the MLB package where you got all the extra inning games, you got all the games, and you would listen to Vin Scully, and it was really like you were watching a game and Vin Scully's narrating. There's no other side technology, graphics, or anything like that. It was really peaceful, the game, and he was talking to you, and I think that's what made him so special, that it wasn't broadcasting to everyone in the world. It was broadcasting to you and talking to you, and that's what made him so special.
And that's so different from today's game. You think about the graphics and everything. Obviously, make a broadcast great, but he didn't need that to be great.
Yep.
All he needed was himself. So we are going to go to break here. When we come back, a few years ago when Fordham baseball played at USC, DJ Sixsmith caught up with Vin Scully, one of the last interviews he did with WFUV. Really special, 7-8 minutes, but just great storytelling once again from Scully. So you won't want to miss that. Stick around for more one-on-one.
Mickey and the Duke. Well, Casey was winning, Hank Aaron was beginning, one Robbie going out, one coming in. Kiner and Midget Goodell, the Thumper and Mel Parnell, and Ike was the only one winning down in Washington. I'm talking baseball, Klazuski, Campanella, talking baseball. The man and Bobby Fella, the Scooter, the Barber, and the Duke. They knew them all from Boston to Dubuque, especially Willie, Mickey, and the Duke. Now my old friend, the Bachelor, well,
DJ Sixsmith here in Los Angeles, California, joined by the voice of the Los Angeles Dodgers, Vin Scully, a proud WFUV sports alum, Fordham graduate. Vin, it's so great to finally meet you in person. What's it like to have some Fordham Rams on the West Coast with you?
Well, it's a delight. It brings back a lot of memories when I tried to play, and it was fun meeting all the players and the coaches. So it's been a very, very worthwhile visit, and I'm actually delighted for the experience.
Now, you told some great stories about your baseball career. If I was an opposing manager back in the late 40s, what would the scouting report have been on one 20-year-old Vin Scully?
Just get it over the plate. You'll get him out.
And when you look back at your game, you're a great center fielder. You like to field the ball. What were the best parts of your game as a baseball player?
Yeah, I could run, I could throw, and I could catch the ball. I just wasn't much of a hitter. I remember I threw one man out at the plate against West Point. So that was a highlight. I understand now when I hear a ball player say, I'd rather throw a guy out than get a base hit. There's something really exhilarating about that. So that would be the best defensive play. I hit one home run in those years, and the one home run, I had my head down, so I assumed that the center fielder misjudged the ball, and it was up at Fordham, and the ball would run to another state, once it got by. But more than that, what I really enjoyed was the camaraderie, being with the guys, the teasing, the good-natured fun on the buses and trains. That's what I remember the most, yeah.
Baseball's been such an integral part of your life for so many decades. Who first inspired your love, and how did it develop over all these years?
Well, actually, it just grew like a small plant. My grammar school was about 20 blocks from the old Polo Grounds. And in those days, the games were at 3:15, and we got out of school at 2:30. So I could walk from my grammar school to the Polo Grounds where the Giants played. And I was a member of the Catholic Youth Organization and the Police Athletic League. And from Monday through Friday, I could go to the game for nothing as members. And then on a weekend, if I saved up soda pop bottles and turned them in for 55 cents, I could sit in the bleachers. So really, it was the game itself. Then I worshipped an outfielder named Mel Ott with the Giants, and things just grew from there.
Now, a little known fact about your Fordham days, you were in a barbershop quartet. I've always wanted to ask you, your musical career, what were you like as a musician, and why did you enjoy singing so much?
Well, I always enjoyed the camaraderie of a team or a couple of guys. I mean, I was always at peace when I was with other fellas. And we had a group called the Shaving Mugs, and pretty good name for a quartet.
That's a great name.
Yeah. And we would sing at the drop of a hat, And then, of course, I've always loved music. I have really loved music. And probably, if I really had to classify it, I love Broadway show tunes more than anything. So if I had to be alone on a desert island, I'd like to have at least several albums of Broadway shows, yeah.
So, Vin, it's been a few decades since you've lived long-term in New York, been in the Bronx. What do you miss most about the Rose Hill campus in the Big Apple?
Well, the last time I was up at school, I was amazed at how the campus had shrunk. I mean, I remember the bucolic days of the early 40s where you had a lot of grass and a lot of trees. Now, when you go up there are a lot more buildings rather than the trees and the grass, but the quad is still there, I believe. And I guess, again, I just loved the whole idea of being at school, playing ball with the team, all my buddies. There's 7 or 8 of us who are still together by mail or phone call, and we hung out. We were a group in those days, if one was married, 2 might be altar boys, 2 would be ushers, 1 would be the best man. I mean, it was a great group, and we still keep in touch.
Vin, when you look at your career, you've been touched by so many great people, but Red Barber was one of the first to believe in your talents. If Red were still around today, what would he think of the announcer and the man that you've become?
Well, I would hope that he would be proud of his work. I would hope that very much. He was somewhat like another father. He really cared. He wanted me to be a success, and he was hard. Critical, like a father would be to a son. Not that he wanted to punish the son, but he wanted the son to follow the rules and grow in the proper way. And that was Red's idea. For many years, I was young Scully on the phone, and he would, make sure that I followed what he thought was the correct way. And I really am indebted to him because he really was a second father.
DJ Sixsmith, Vin Scully. Vin, everybody asks the question about when you'll finally close the chapter of your broadcasting career. But what I want to know is, what's the biggest reason why you keep coming back year after year after year?
It's the love affair with the game. I have never, ever been disillusioned. I just love it. And add the noise of the crowd, and it's exhilarating. What I have done is cut back a great deal. It's a rather long, arduous year. Unless you experience it, you have no idea that it is tough. You're going from time zone to time zone. You're checking in at hotels at 3 o'clock in the morning. You're going to play a game that night, and the hotel comes alive at 7:30 in the morning. And so you get to the ballpark, and you're sleepy, and it's tough. But when it all boils down to the game begins, the challenge out on the field, they make difficult things seem so easy, and add the crowd noise, and I just still love it. It's been a great marriage, and it's continued to hold my imagination, believe me.
You've been a man of God your whole life, and you've been on quite a roller coaster ride from the highest of highs to the lowest of lows. How has faith helped you prevail throughout your entire life?
Oh, I don't know what I would have done without it. I preface everything, including the fellow saying today, have a good year, and my first 2 words are God willing. I firmly believe in one old line, which is, if you want to make God smile, tell him your plans. And I firmly understand that completely. So it's been a great gift that has been given to me. I've tried to cherish it and not abuse it. I know I could lose it between now and I walk away from you, so I have never taken it for granted. And God willing, I'll try it again this year.
All right, Vin, finally, let's wrap things up here. You've spoken so eloquently about baseball players for so many years. What's one word to describe who Vin Scully is?
Humble, grateful, which is really what it is. I mean, I should be on my knees at least 10 hours a day, every day of the year. I mean, I feel that completely.
Vin Scully, an absolute pleasure, and keep squeezing life for what it's worth. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, DJ. My pleasure.
Back here on One, celebrating the life of Vin Scully with a classic baseball tune there, center field, of course. Sam Davis, Ryan Gregg Ware. You just heard from DJ Sixsmith with the man himself, Vin Scully. An incredible interview, Ryan. I want to go quickly back to Bob Costas before we jump into that. And sitting back there, behind the glass, listening to you and Mike with that interview, I was just, first of all, the stories of Bob, obviously somebody who knew Vin very well, was just unbelievable and awesome to hear from Bob. We're all really appreciative of Bob Costas giving us some time to talk, and especially Ray Charles, hearing that story, it was really just made me smile ear to ear, just like he did when he heard the voice of Vin Scully, which I think was just a really awesome, having Bob on. And with that DJ interview as well, though, a couple things I wanted to point out just before we head to an interview with Tony Reali, another interview keeping this show moving. But DJ asked Vin, what kept him going year after year? What kept him going, coming back to the Dodgers year after year, despite the fact that he was growing old in age, had been covering the Dodgers for a long time. And he said it was his love for baseball. And I think that is where we can focus a lot of who Vin Scully is. He just fell in love with the sound of the crowd from when he was a young age. That carried him well into his career. You could tell in some of his bigger calls, he lets the crowd noise happen, and I think that goes back to that idea of just loving the sound of the crowd and loving baseball, and that's what Vin was, and then that's what you heard from that interview there.
It sounds like such a simple concept, but it's actually one of the most complicated, because that relationship that he had with the audience, where it was like a conversation and a friendship. He always talked about how it was a friendship, whoever he's broadcasting the game to, but then knowing when to be silent, knowing when to let everything around
it's so
you take
difficult
over.
For a broadcaster. So difficult.
For someone that doesn't broadcast, it may seem easy because it's like, just don't talk, but to truly every time know exactly this is when to pause. The story with the Hank Aaron home run to break the record, he leaves the press box in the middle of the home
Gets a
run.
cup of coffee. It's like a minute. He really lets the crowd just, and there are fireworks being shot off too. You really hear everything. It makes you feel like you're there, as and that is so cool. I think Hank Aaron home run record, 1974. Yesterday, in 2022, we're sitting on our couch watching YouTube, and we feel like we're there. And that's what Vin Scully does. He really brings everyone in. He brings the audience in and makes you feel like, okay, you really feel like you're in that crowd, in that moment, which is incredibly special.
And just like the love affair he had with the game, you can tell in those moments how much it meant to him. And then in that interview, he talks about that's why he kept coming back. 55, 60 years of doing it, it didn't matter. It was the same game he grew up, he fell in love with, and he stayed true to himself through it all.
Yeah, Vin Scully, obviously an icon. Love talking about him. One story before we go to Tony Reali real quick was very interesting. When he was calling games with NBC on a national broadcast level, he was calling a game. It was in Chicago, game of the week. It was on a Saturday. After the game, it went 10 innings. He flew to Houston to cover a game against the Dodgers game on Sunday, and that was the series finale in that one the following day. He gets to Houston, and the Dodgers game from the night before, Saturday night, it's still going on. So instead of going to the hotel, getting some rest, calling the game on Sunday, after working on Saturday in Chicago, he drives straight to the Astrodome and puts on the headset and starts calling that Dodgers game. He calls 23 innings in 2 cities in one day. That's Vin Scully.
And he nailed it all.
Of course he nailed it all, and only Vin, someone that loves the game of baseball as much as he did, as much as he talked about, would do something like that. And I think that just speaks to who he was as a person, just an unbelievable broadcaster that could do that physically, but also just did it for the love of the game.
Yeah, to want to do that and to then nail it, they're two separate things, but it's a perfect way to describe that is an ultimate love affair, to really want it. You hear the stories. He wanted to call every game. He wanted to call every single piece of action. I believe he's called 4% of baseball games. That's the stat.
That's
insane. Sports, Sam. It's
Yeah.
been around a long time. So that number, that is a massive 4%. It shows just how long he was in this.
So we're going to keep this one-on-one rolling here. Up next, we have an interview with Tony Reali. I sit down, as well as Thomas Aiello, and talk with Tony Reali from ESPN, offer some great insight, WFUV alum as well, into Vin Scully. But more one-on-one right around the corner. Let's listen to this interview here with Tony Reali coming up. One-on-one, New York's longest running sports call-in show, a special show honoring the life and legacy of Vin Scully. Sam Davis, Thomas Aiello, pleased to be joined by Tony Reali, ESPN, host of Around the Horn since 2004. Of course, a Fordham and WFUV sports alum from 2000. Tony, thank you very much for taking some time to be with us today.
Oh, anything for you guys, and of course, anything for Mr. Vin Scully, who I really believe the imprint of everything we do starts with Vin, whether it's as a sportscaster or as a voice just out in public. How we communicate, to me, really, in my mind, starts a lot with Vin Scully.
We've heard so many amazing things, so many amazing stories about Vin in the last couple of days and, of course, throughout his life. So I want to ask you just, this might be a difficult question to answer, but Tony, what did Vin mean to you?
I think the imprint of what we do as sportscasters is Vin Scully. I think he elevated the form, both from a play-by-play standpoint, and then maybe for me, more importantly now, as I've gotten away from play-by-play game calling and doing a daily sports television show. It's the medium of storytelling, which is the oldest medium there is. It's the first form of entertainment. It was in the cave, but Vin was doing something a little bit different than drawing on the walls, right? He was drawing on our minds. And it's a beautiful thing. Baseball is my favorite sport. It's our national pastime, but nobody passed the time like Vin Scully did. I had Bill Plaschke of the Los Angeles Times, who has covered Los Angeles sports for 3, maybe even 4 decades at this point, who knew Vin Scully as well as anybody, honestly, and was the deepest subject of many of his columns. And he said, and I thought this was very, very poignant, that when you listen to Vin, you prayed for a foul ball. I mean, how ridiculous is that? The most boring thing in a baseball game is a foul ball. But what it does is extends the game. It extends the opportunity for story. So when I talk about how we communicate as people, we communicate in stories. That from the start of the human race, as I said before. And Vin was that. So as a Fordham broadcaster, as I am and as you are, I mean, it goes back to Vin for us. And his lofty stature and ideals in a voice, but also in heart and soul, for me, is something we all try to live up to. And it is that model, that beacon that we look at to say, man, if we could even do it halfway to that, we're getting the job done.
So Tony, obviously, Vin has been a part of so many incredible moments. A lot of people think of Kirk Gibson. Some may think of Joe Montana. Which is your moment that really stands out from Vin Scully's broadcasting, just getting things out on the fly and making a perfect call?
Perfect call. I think there were a couple, of course. There were more than a couple, but the couple that come to my mind as a New Yorker was 1986. It's tough when you're a fan of a team. I happen to be a fan of the Yankees growing up, but of course I was with every step of the 86 Mets, one of the most thrilling teams to ever take the field in all of baseball. And you fall in love with your local broadcasters. For me at that time, it was Bob Murphy calling the Mets. But by the time you get to a World Series, you lose your local crew a little bit, and you're watching the national crew, who happened to be Scully. And the call of gets by Buckner and the Mets win it is a tough call, I think, as a play-by-play person, because it is not, well, it's not the swing, and the roll is not exactly what you expect. So now you're really describing what you see. So he calls it a little roller down the line that gets behind the bag. Knight comes home and the Mets win it. That's a direct quote. That's how much it's burned into my memory. For me, that described action, and it was very visual, right? I think the poetry of Vin Scully is on display with the Gibson call, which you just alluded to, which is the improbable has become the impossible. That's beautifully poetic. And that's a moment you ask your sportscasters to provide a wow in a way that the viewer is already feeling, but maybe can't express. And I think that does it. The improbable, yes, of course, this whole season's been improbable. And the impossible, this guy couldn't even walk. He had a home run off the greatest closer we had ever seen at the time. Improbable, impossible. And you alluded to the Montana call, and I think I can hear the voice of my mentor, Bob Ahrens, and my mentor, Marty Glickman, in my ear as I hear Vin Scully's call. Because what did he do when he did Montana to Dwight Clark? There were at least 20 seconds, 17 seconds. I think I timed it out earlier this week, but it's about 20 seconds of crowd noise. He laid out for the call. He allowed the energy and the passion of the moment. You could hear the fans in San Francisco cheering, and he did that in that moment. So those are 3 different examples. One is kind of a fluke play. One is the spur of the moment, heartfelt call. And the third is knowing your place as a sportscaster. Those are 3 calls for me that really show Vin at the highest level.
Tony, when you say that, I think of Hank Aaron as well, when he hit that record-breaking home run, and he took a minute. I mean, it was a minute, and he stepped away, had a sip of coffee, came back, just another moment of, letting the crowd kind of speak for itself.
As play-by-play broadcasters, or as anybody who talks for a living, the hardest thing to do is not talk. And it's not because of any reason of your own ego. I know people sometimes say that, or it's maybe your own anxiety. It's hard to allow for natural sound and not want to fill that with your own voice, because that's why you're here. That's your job, right? It's not ego, but it's anxiety. You want to carry the moment too, and you're reacting to something that maybe you're amazed by. You really are. But to sit back, he elevated that into a necessity of the job, right? There's so many great calls in the 50s and 60s. I can think of Howard Cosell, who's considered one of the great voices of all time, where he does the exact opposite of that, where he talks through it. And that's a tough thing now in our ears, because Vin changed the way people call the game, and in that case, by not calling it. It's a beautiful thing.
So, Tony, you had a quote a while ago. You came back to broadcast Fordham versus Manhattan in 2015, and you had said you were thinking about Vin Scully and Marty Glickman and all of the names that have come before you, going back to your FUV roots. When you did that game, how much did it kind of seep into the back of your head that, wow, I'm really at the place, and I went to the place that Vin Scully went through? How much did that really linger in your mind?
Good question. I knew I wanted to be a broadcaster and a sportscaster since I was 5 years old. As I like to say from my favorite movie, as far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a sportscaster. And growing up in New York, the voice of the Giants, the Jets, the Knicks, and the Nets. That's Michael K. Mike Green. Maybe not in the order I just gave, but Michael K. Mike Green, Chris Carino, Bob Papa. That's all I knew. And then as I began to become a huge sports fan as I got older, I recognized, wow, the greatest who ever did it was a Fordham man, was a Fordham prep and Fordham man. That's an amazing thing. So I'm a sentimental person. I maybe you sense this from me, from my voice, or hosting Around the Horn. I have feelings. My feelings have feelings. So yes, when I walked through Rosedale campus that first day, I thought of Vin Scully. I imagined Vin Scully on the campus. I'd seen pictures. There's pictures of him, the shock of red hair, and of course all those other greats. And being at Fordham, calling basketball, football one-on-one, covering the Yankees, where I was literally elbow to elbow with Michael Kay. But seeing those guys, Mike Green, Chris Carino, come back, or welcome Fordham students to their studio, that was a real and ever-present part of my experience. So the lineage. But think of it this way. I graduated from Fordham in 2000. Of all the years they could have had a commencement speaker that would ring truest to me, that was the year they had Vin Scully. So an aspiring sportscaster myself got sent away from Fordham in graduation by the greatest sportscaster of all time. Got a moment to sit with him before he gave the commencement, where he spoke to me, and then he spoke to all the students that day. And he told me something that rings true to me as a person now. And this is what I come to know. Everyone had a personal experience with Vin, it seems. The remembrances are so beautiful. And it's a miracle of life that somebody could touch somebody where everybody thought he spoke to them personally. Well, he did for me, because he said to me, and then at the commencement speech, forget sports, think about life. Life often gives you the test long before it gives you the lesson. Now, on that day of your graduation, there's a lot going through your mind, and it stuck in my ear because I remember it. But it's played out in my head now in the 2 decades since that, as I became a person who hosts a daily sports show on ESPN, my dream, as I became a person who deals with the stresses of that. And then I became a father, my other dream of my life. As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a dad of children now. There's so many things in life you have no control over. And for my charts were 3 or 4 ways spread on the table. I prepped too much for life, for games, or I did it in a way that I thought I was doing enough, and going beyond was good. But Vin, in that moment, was telling me, even though I didn't realize it then, you have to roll with life. You're going to get tests long before you get the lesson. It's going to be how you respond. The only thing you have control over in life is how you respond to life, not how you prepare for life, right? And to me, that moment, coming from Vin Scully, but not even realizing it then, makes even more sense now. That's how I prepare for my show every day. When I'm on set, I'm listening to the panelists. As a television host now, it's not so much talking, it's listening. And I'm listening and then rolling with where the conversation goes. And those are much better debates. And those are much better shows when I do that. Much like Vin was watching and listening to the moment with Gibson and then responded as such. It's a lesson for sportscasting, but it's a lesson for life.
Tony, one more question for me. You mentioned Vin's authenticity, his ability to connect with the audience. The final video that he put out when he was signing off with the Dodgers back in the day, I know, right? It's so touching. How did that hit you when you first saw it, and what did it kind of make you think about from that rush of emotion?
We did it on Around the Horn, and we did it on ESPN that day. And then I brought it back to finish our tribute to Vin earlier this week to end on his own words. And it did a couple of things, but it's going to sound like I'm elevating Around the Horn to an art form. But people will forget what we say when we're communicating as much as we do daily on TV. They might remember one great quote you have. People are going to forget what we do on the day-to-day at some point. But they're never going to forget if you can truly reach them and make them feel. People will never forget how you make them feel. And I know this to be the case as I have now experienced 20 years on TV. It's an impossible thing. The improbable has become the impossible. Reality's done 20 years on TV. But the fact is, that was a natural progression for me to recognize it's not just about being the smartest stat boy I could be, or even the happiest, most energetic person I can be, which is I certainly was when I first walked into Fordham. Go back through the tapes, guys. You're not going to find a more energetic one-on-one than the one I was doing. But that's not the only way to reach people. What I found is the feel. And that's exactly what I heard from Vin. I knew it from Vin. I could sense it from all his calls when he's telling a story about, a squirrel or a rabbit in the middle of a foul ball, as we said before. But acknowledging, that there will be a moment where this voice isn't here, but it will always be there. That to me is right. The feeling will always be there. And it's okay, if we want to talk even bigger about life, to grieve or mourn or just honor, as we're doing today, the loss of somebody we didn't physically know. I had one meeting really with him, maybe two, but he touched us all in a certain way, or he's touched people we know in a certain way. And that's a feeling you don't forget. People don't forget how you make them feel. He made us feel like we were watching the game with a friend who was telling a great story. The greatest storyteller has moved on. There'll never be another Vin Scully. We lost our only one, but the stories will always remain.
Vin Scully remains connected to all of us here at FUV, both past and present. Tony, we are very grateful to have you on. Thanks so much for sharing some really awesome words on Vin and WFUV.
Guys, you always have me. I'm always here for you, but I'm going to give you now one bonus point here, okay? You're going to be the first broadcasters to ever mute me. You ready? Here's the mute button. Here's the... I'm hitting the button for you guys. Ready?
Tony is muted. We can't hear him. I didn't even know that would work. I love it. Thank you so much, Tony. We are going to be right back here on One-on-One. Stick around. That was Tony Reali. Really appreciate all these FUV alums giving us some time to speak on Vin Scully. Tony, as energetic as always. Up next, we have another interview, this time with John Cirillo, the PR director of the Vin Scully Award. That's going to be up next. Let's hear that. John Cirillo.
One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. I'm Andrew Galata alongside Danny Scott, and we are joined by a very special guest. Among many things, he has a long history with the late great Vin Scully, who we're honoring during this edition of One-on-One. He is the PR director of the Vin Scully Award and helped facilitate many different events between Scully and Fordham. John Cirillo, thank you for joining us, John.
It's a pleasure to be on the FUV airwaves with the future stars. So thanks for having me.
Oh, no, thank you for coming on. And The first question I wanted to ask is really, how did you get to meet Vin Scully? How did you get connected with him? Obviously, through your many, different meetings and events that you've helped. What's kind of that first time that you helped him and got to meet him?
To say first, when I decided to attend Fordham as a high school junior back in the 70s, I heard that Vin Scully went to Fordham, and I said, I'm going to Fordham. So that was, I don't think I'd be on the phone with you guys talking if it weren't for Vin Scully. Just way back when you're deciding on a school that you could broadcast and get those reps and learn the game, so to speak. Hearing that Vin Scully was a Fordham alum just gave me the impetus that there wasn't another school I would go to.
Yeah, so you just mentioned Vin Scully's great Fordham alumni, probably the most notorious Fordham alumni that we have at the radio station. Can you explain a little bit like what his career was like back in the day? Obviously, that was before all this technology that we have now, but what was he doing that made him so great?
Well, 67 years as the voice of the Dodgers, but he really was the voice of baseball. 25 World Series, I believe, and 12 All-Star games, and the game of the week on NBC. This was pre the era that you can watch a game, on satellite or ESPN and all its games. So, it was a rarity that on Saturday afternoon you would tune in and there would be Vin Scully with his melodic calls and great sense of humor and just an impeccable style that will never be duplicated.
And it's definitely something you talk about, how he was on so many times. Because I think you can, I'm a Mets fan, big Mets fan. You could talk to really any team, and they have a moment that Vin Scully called, which is kind of crazy. The Mets with the '86 World Series. I think people go to the Hank Aaron home run, and you could just kind of go time to time. And he's always the one calling, those big games and those primetime games, throughout the, 1960s to 2000s, which is just, to me, crazy. I mean, what do you think from him allows him to, I guess, own the moment so well? And what you think young broadcasters maybe can learn from Vin, not only during the broadcast, maybe handling other parts of, the game as well, and his craft?
Well, a few things, the reason why he is such an icon, and, many people say the greatest broadcaster in history, not only the greatest baseball play-by-play guy, but I think that, the two things he would always say, pull up a chair, and the audience was an audience of one, even though it was an audience of millions. He really spoke to, his listeners as if they were the only one, sitting alongside him. And I think, the other thing about Vin is that he didn't try to take over the moment. He let the moment speak for itself. And a lot of people talk about giving that call and then having a minute or two of silence to let the crowd, help to tell that story. So those are two of the things. I think sometimes, he did it in such a quiet kind of style, not over dramatic. And I think one of the things the young announcers can learn from him is that you don't need to scream. Just call what you see, and it'll all fall into place. And I know that it's something that all of us at WFUV, from my era to today, is that you try not to be partial. That you're calling, even if you're calling the Rams games, that there are two sides to it. The other team, deserves respect and those sorts of things.
Yeah, so obviously I'm from California, so I grew up a huge Giants fan. So obviously I heard a lot of Vin Scully's games, being with the Dodgers for so long as their broadcaster. Can you just explain a little bit of his history with the Dodgers, how he kind of got the start and how he was able to keep it for so long?
Yeah, well, he started in Brooklyn. He was hired by Red Barber, and I guess when Connie, he was so good, he had to be 23 years old. And when Connie Desmond left, he became, the secondary voice with Barber. And then, when the Dodgers moved to LA, he was the lead guy by that point. So, a meteoric career, and he was able to stand the test of time, more than stand the test of time. I was reflecting that good friend of mine who called the games with me at Fordham, Bill Carey, became a huge guy in news. He was the news director at Channel 2, Channel 4, Channel 7, and then Pix 11. And he kind of reminded me of how privileged we are, that we have privileged seats in a life in sports, and especially in the Fordham alumni fraternity, that sometimes we don't realize how fortunate we are. And looking back on Vin's careers, right now we mourn a legend, but we also celebrate a great life, and a man who, he would genuinely give you the shirt off his back. He did so many for so many people. Think about how many people can say that I went to Fordham because of Vin Scully. There are many of the alum, Charlie Slows, and guys like Michael K, Mike Breen, and now you young guys, you hear them live, Breen and K, Bob Papa, Chris Carino, all the stars that are out of Fordham. But would any of this have happened without Vin Scully?
And you mentioned that he would give his shirt off his back to anybody, and you obviously helped facilitate a lot of events for him giving back to Fordham, whether it be his, commencement speeches or his time with Fordham baseball, where he was able to, record some things for them. So I guess bring it back to that commencement speech. Kind of how did that situation play out, and was there any kind of interesting stories from that day or that situation leading up to the day?
There sure are. I was brought back to Fordham by Frank McLaughlin, who was the athletic director at the time, back in '97. And in 2000, I was just delighted to hear that Vin Scully was going to do the commencement speech. And I got the assignment to, handle the media with Vin. And I remember one of the things that happened, the weather was so bad that he wasn't late for the commencement, but he was late for a lot of the pre-game activities, so to speak. And, so we didn't have the chance as much time as we would have, but, again, so gracious with the media. And two of the things that he said during the commencement really rang true. One of them was that, this is back in 2000. So you're talking, pre-Twitter and Instagram and all that stuff. But he reminded the students, take a pause, get off of that, he called it cyber optics, and, take a break from that. So he really was a visionary in that speech, giving the grads a thought that it's not all about the electronics. It's about what you're looking at and, what you're observing. And another thing, he told the story about a teammate in high school at Fordham Prep. He was named Larry Miggins. And they used to talk, Vin wanted to become an announcer when he was 8 years old. He always tells the story, the redhead kid, with a shirt hanging out and a tear in his pants, that wanted to become a broadcaster. But he and Miggins were talking about their dreams. And Miggins said, I want to be in the big leagues. And Vince said, I want to be calling baseball. And Vince said, wouldn't it be amazing if I called your first home run? This is back in, the 40s. So in 1952, Larry Miggins, who had only a 43-game career in the big leagues, comes to the plate in one of two innings that Vin called in those days, only 2 innings a game, and Scully calls the home run. And that's the most improbable thing that could ever happen. And the end of that story is he told the graduates, dream your dreams, because anything can come true. And it has come true for many of those who followed in Mr. Scully's footsteps.
And I know you've also been in charge of the Vin Scully Award that goes on here at Fordham. Can you talk a little bit about what that is and why it's so important?
Sure. Well, back in 2008, the brass at WFUV and Bob Ahrens, who was the executive sports director, the Bobby C of those days, was instrumental because he had a great friendship with Vin Scully. Of course, Vin would embrace anything from Fordham. But we had a great conduit in Bob Ahrens, and Vin received the first ever Vin Scully Award named for him. And I'll never forget that night. Now I've worked with Pat Riley and Patrick Ewing, whose birthday is today, and Oscar De La Hoya. And I've never been so had such a case of the butterflies as the night I got to work with Vin Scully on the first Scully Award. And he was just, he was Vin, just taking pictures with alum that were there and, posing for media shots. I remember he took a great shot with Sal Marciano, who's another outstanding Fordham WFUV grad. But on the same night, the Charles Osgood Award, named for the great CBS newsman, was also given for the first time. And we're up on a mini stage, a riser, so the photographers could get the pictures. And when the session was done, I remember Mr. Osgood and Mr. Scully looking at each other, and they're both in their 80s, and they're thinking, like, how am I going to get down from this riser with my creaky knees, And I looked at each of them, one on my left and one on my right, and I extended my arms and I said, gentlemen, it would be a pleasure. And they both leaned on my arm and we got off the riser. And wow, I wish I had a tape of that.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. It's definitely an awesome memory. And before we let you go, John, I just want to ask one more question as we, obviously celebrate the legendary life of Vin Scully. What's one thing that you want everyone to kind of remember when they think of Vin Scully, not only the broadcaster, but just the person?
I think that it's a reminder for all of us that no matter how high you go and how successful you are, that you should treat everyone with respect and dignity. And he leaves us with such a foundation. I couldn't be more proud to be a Fordham alum.
He is the PR director of the Vin Scully Award, among many, many other things. John Cerrillo, thank you for joining us, John.
Hey guys, great to be with you. Thank you so much.
We'll be right back.
Thank you so much, John.
We'll be right back on One on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show.
This is WFUV, New York.
You're listening to One on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVsports.org.
Mike, I can't believe we're already in hour 3. This is unbelievably, it is going by so fast here. I didn't know if we'd have time for everything. It looks like we are, but just barely, because we've had so many guests and they've been so generous to take some time with us. But it's been really special overall, just again, getting back to what we're doing here and celebrating the life of Vin Scully.
Yeah, I think it's been an amazing show, and I think you heard so many great stories from John Cirillo. The one about Larry Miggins, his high school teammate at Fordham Prep. They both played baseball together there. And they talked about, Vin Scully talking about, broadcasting. And obviously Larry Miggins talking about playing. Larry Miggins ends up making the major leagues. Vin Scully ends up broadcasting for the Brooklyn Dodgers. The Cardinals come into town, and his friend Larry Miggins does as well. And what's better place than for Larry Miggins' first home run to be with Vin Scully on the call? And he still, to the very end, he said that was his favorite home run he ever called. And that was his favorite moment in the broadcast booth, to call a homer from his friend. So hearing that story from John Cirillo, a truly amazing one, and we're continuing to unpack these stories throughout the entire show.
It's storybook. It's a storybook kind of, chapter of the long, long book of Vin Scully. And I want to go back to Tony Reali for a second. We thank him for taking some time, because he said a few things that really, hung true to me, how he only met Vin once, and it wasn't even about, the broadcasting advice or anything like that really stuck with him. It was about the person he was. And that's been a theme throughout the night, how it goes much further than just his occupation. It's about the person behind the mic. And once again, Tony Reali showing how special Vin was in that aspect.
Yeah, and I think it was all part of setting up what WFUV is now. We couldn't have WFUV Sports without Vin Scully, the person, being able to set this foundation and pave this path. You think about the names we've had in the show, those WFUV alums, Michael Kay, broadcaster for the New York Yankees, Ryan Rucco and Spiro Dedes coming up later in the show, John Cerrillo, of course. We've had numerous WFUV alums be able to join the show, and to be able to hear their stories but know that Vin Scully was really the man who started it all, I think that's amazing. It's a testament to the person he is, because he kept coming back and he kept doing those workshops. He kept talking to the students, and that really was the impact he had in, building this radio station from where he started.
And how about on that broadcasting side, Reali talking about when he was calling a game, you're rooting for a foul ball. That's the most boring thing in baseball. But now when Vin Scully's on the call, that he makes it seem that exciting. It means that the story that's going on gets continued. And you've heard that a lot. Costas talking about how there was never a double play. It was like the baseball gods were watching over Vin Scully, knowing we have to let him finish this story. And once again, with that foul ball, it kind of encapsulates here. Well, this is what it's all about. It's Vin Scully telling stories.
And, from my memories of watching those Dodger games, when we had purchased the MLB Extra Innings, I remember that it was almost more exciting to hear the in-between pitch conversation that Vin Scully was having with you than the actual game itself. And I think that's what made him so special. There's very few broadcasters that make the game as entertaining when there's not any action going on. And I think Vin Scully did that so amazing, where there could be nothing going on in the game. It could be a 1-0 game. It could be a very bland version of baseball, but he still adds his own character to it, his own flavor to it that keeps you interested, and that's just how good of a storyteller he was, and that's what made him great. You tuned in to listen to Vin Scully as much as you did to watch the Dodgers or wanting to know what was going on in the game.
Yeah, exactly. It was the balance. It's just as much about what's on the field than what is being called. And you shift over to John Cirillo, another obviously Fordham staple. He talked about off the bat in that interview, well, once he found out where Vin Scully went to school, that being Fordham, he made up his mind. That's where I want to go. And that's the impact he had, not knowing much, being a kid growing up. It's, I want to be a broadcaster. Vin Scully went there. Well, that must mean that's where they produce the best. And that's what ultimately someone who he ended up, meeting and having a relationship later in life, that's where he made the decision to come to Fordham.
And that's a testament to all the broadcasters we've seen from WFUV. You can't help but think if Vin Scully did not go to Fordham, or if Vin Scully wasn't there first to start it, there wouldn't be all those great alumni that you can make a list of and you can marvel at. It was because of Vin Scully. He started it all. It all starts with one, and it was Vin Scully that was able to start it, and I think that's so tremendous that he paved the road for everyone else to do that. Had it not been him who was able to come to Fordham, be the great broadcaster he was, all the broadcasters that came out of wouldn't have been at Fordham, and it probably would have been a little different how it shaped out. So I think that's truly a testament to the legacy he's left behind.
And at the end of that interview with John Cirillo, it was almost like he was at a loss for words, talking about, how much pride and how proud he was to represent Fordham when it meant that, Vin Scully is a guy that went here too. And it's just that alone holds so much weight. It's been something that me, Sam, and you have talked about today. It's just knowing that this guy was, here, and played such a huge role in having us be in this spot. It doesn't matter that we didn't meet him. He had such a big impact.
Yeah, and I think he was a student like all of us at the end of the day. He played on the baseball team for a couple of years. He did WFUV. He did those football games. He did those basketball games before he even did the baseball games, similar to how we started at WFUV. And for me personally, he went to Fordham Prep. He was on the campus of Roseau in high school, something that I can share with him being from Fordham Prep and graduating from the high school. So it makes you think that he was in our shoes at one point, and he did all the same things we're doing now, and it's because of him that we can do it. And I think that's a great way to reflect and something that really shows, all he left behind that, we're able to do now because of him.
And coming up, we're going to take a very quick break. We're going to be joined with Spiro Dedes, who we've talked about this great line of Fordham broadcasters, and it's no different. It's from Vin Scully, and then you go all the way down. Spiro Dedes, another important name on that list, Mike, and he has some great stories as he was the Lakers radio guy and got to meet Vin that way.
New York's longest running sports call-in show, a special edition celebrating the life of Vin Scully. Sam Davis, Ryan Gregoire. We are now joined by Spiro Dedes, play-by-play for CBS for the NFL and college basketball. Of course, a Fordham and WFUV grad from 2001. Spiro, thank you so much for being with us today.
Sam, Ryan, it's a pleasure. How you guys doing?
Great. Doing well. And of course, we have to get into the man, Vin Scully. He's touched so many lives, so many unique ways. What are kind of the memories? What are the moments that come to mind when you think of Vin Scully?
Well, yeah, Vin was such a larger than life figure in the industry. And for those of us who grew up really in any part of the country, the name Vin Scully, it was just something, a different level, someone that we all tried to emulate, someone that we all looked up to. For me, I think of all the baseball games, the national games that he called. I have early recollections of even some of the national NFL games that Vin called. Some of my earliest memories of watching the NFL on television. A career, I think, that will be unparalleled no matter how far into the future we can all go and think about. There are some unbelievably gifted announcers in this business, guys, no matter what the sport. But I think when you have a guy like Vin who really became synonymous with the sport that he covered, really became the voice of baseball. There are so few guys that can be put into that category. Really transcended the industry. We say that about a lot of athletes, or some athletes, some of the all-time greats, and Vin certainly is in that category. He's in the pantheon, and you can make a pretty strong argument that he is not only the greatest baseball announcer ever, but the greatest sports play-by-play man that we've ever had.
And Spiro, I believe you got a chance to meet Vin when you started out with the Lakers as their radio broadcaster. So wondering if you could take us back to that experience, what it was like meeting him, the conversations with Vin Scully.
Yeah, so September of 2005, I had just moved to Los Angeles about a month prior. So I got the news that the Lakers were going to offer me the radio job in June of that summer of 2005. So, you can imagine a 25, 26-year-old kid getting ready to pack up from northern New Jersey and ship himself across the country. This sense of euphoria, this nervousness, this anxiousness of starting this new chapter. It was such an incredible time in my life. And just as I had gotten settled, I had just met some of the people I was going to be working with on the Lakers radio network. And one of those people was my new statistician, a guy by the name of Doug Mann, who had been a longtime statistician in the LA market for years and years. And among the people that Doug had worked with was none other than Vin Scully. He had been Vin's Dodgers statistician for a number of years. And Doug, being the amazing guy that he is, he arranged for me to visit with Vin in the booth at Dodger Stadium before a weeknight game in September of 2005. So you could imagine my excitement level, the nervousness. I mean, I could remember sweating through my clothes as I was standing outside the booth waiting to be ushered in. And, I'm thinking, Vin, it's pregame. Vin's getting ready for his notes. He's going through prepping and all the things that we do before a broadcast. I'm thinking they're going to bring me in and out. It's going to be a very quick visit. But as soon as I got in, there's Vin, perfectly coiffed hair, the immaculate suit. He's fully suited up. It's like 3 hours before the game, and he's in go mode already. And he waves for me to come in. We meet, we exchange pleasantries, and he points to the seat next to him, and he says, he asks me to sit down. And so I sat, and he proceeded to start this just incredibly warm give and take, asking me about my family, my background, my journey to get to LA and the Lakers. And once he realized I was a Northeast kid, he then proceeded to tell me about his journey that he took from Brooklyn to Southern California so many decades prior, all the way back to the early 1950s when he made his iconic move. And I'm just sitting there listening to Vin tell me about his life. He could remember the first street that he bought his apartment on when he first moved out there with the Dodgers, and living on the same street with a young coach who had just been hired by UCLA named John Wooden. They literally lived on the same street before they became who they were. And my jaw basically hit the floor. And it was just kind of one part of this incredible story that he told me about his move. And, he put his hand on my shoulder. I mean, here is this titan of broadcasting taking about 15, 20 minutes before a game to tell me about his life and to encourage me. We took a photo that he ended up signing for me, and he put this incredible inscription on it. It's one of my prized possessions. I'll have it up in my home for as long as I live. And I just walked out of that booth, guys, learning so much from him. We all knew Vin as the broadcaster and this larger than life personality, but I just took away from that conversation how to treat people, no matter who they are, no matter what level, walk of life, age. This person to take time out and to make me feel like I was a welcome member of this new city where I felt like a complete outsider at that point. Didn't know a single soul in LA. It was such a period of anxiety for me, and he really gave me the confidence and put my mind at ease, and it really kind of catapulted me through those early years in the job.
One-on-one, remembering Vin Scully sitting down with CBS broadcaster Spiro Dedes. Spiro, how special is it for you that when you think of WFUV, your own career journey, it all comes back to Vin Scully? How much pride do you take in your time at FUV, knowing that it all started with Vin?
For me, guys, it's everything. It's one of the first, really the first reason I learned about FUV was Vin Scully. That's the school that Vin Scully went to. It's as simple as that. And then you started to research and you realized that that's Mike Breen's alma mater, Michael Kay, Bob Papa, Chris Carino, a who's who of broadcasting. And being a part of that fraternity for the last 20 plus years has been one of the most special parts of my career, and all the good fortune that I've enjoyed, and some of the incredible jobs that I've been able to work over the years. But being a part of that brotherhood is something that's meant very much to me. And the person at the top of that list who started it all was Vin. It begins and ends with him. And so the news of his passing this week, obviously very sad. And I think the remembrances have been just incredibly poignant over the past few days. But I think it's a time to celebrate a life, guys, that I don't know that we ever see again. Especially where the industry is changing now. And, it was just a different time back then. And Vin, for his career to span over so many decades, you think of the athletes that he called, the games in which that they played, really unparalleled. And, to have my name associated in some small way with the university and the radio station where Vin began his just incredibly legendary career is something that's just an honor for me.
And there's a lot that Vin did that obviously is unprecedented, but when you put and you look into how he was able to call games 67 years without color for a large variety of them, just how difficult is that being a broadcaster yourself to work game in and game out without a color guy for a large portion of it?
I've never done it, guys, and I have friends in the business who not only have done it in the past but are still doing it now. Especially on the radio side, as teams have tried to cut costs and eliminate the analyst. I can't imagine how difficult it is. But when you think of Vin and the broadcaster that he was, it makes sense that someone who really had to work in so many different scenarios, that being one of them. In an era before television and the obstacles that created, and someone who invented part of the vernacular of a sport, it makes perfect sense that someone who had to experience those difficulties could become such a well-rounded announcer and play-by-play man. And Vin was the pinnacle. To listen to a game now, it's almost like a symphony to hear his voice, and the mellifluousness, the vocabulary, the sense of humor, the storytelling. He is, if you had a laboratory to make the perfect play-by-play announcer, Vin Scully is the person that I think would come out, especially for baseball. Just someone that I think we all try to emulate and learn from, and certainly celebrate right now.
You just said emulating and learning from Vin, and obviously there's no one like Vin, and you can't replicate somebody like that. But is there anything that you've taken from your broadcasting career and tried to apply, from Vin's career, obviously, to your own? Any sort of techniques or advice you've taken from him?
Yeah, for me, guys, I was so, when I was younger, especially, and I can remember being at FUV, I was always so conscious of my sound and my voice. And I always wanted to be like the big voice announcers, the play-by-play men, Al Michaels and Jim Nantz, and those guys that just had the pipes, right? I mean, Brad Nessler comes to mind. And I was so self-conscious of the way I sounded. I think I put all my eggs in that basket trying to refine my sound, that I didn't pay enough attention to the development of the other aspects of my play-by-play call. And one of them was storytelling and letting my personality out. I can remember Bob Ahrens, who you guys know, of course, was the longtime sports director at FUV, and was such a mentor to my era of fellow Fordham FUVers. Would always tell me, don't be afraid to show your personality a little bit more. And you think of a guy like Vin, who was such a master storyteller, and a guy who, as soon as you flip the channel on and you heard Vin's voice, you just immediately were put at ease. The warmth, the vibration of his voice, the elegance of his voice, he just made you feel like you were in the living room or in the booth right next to him, talking shop, and just having this really easy going experience of watching the game at the ballpark. And that was something that I always tried to focus on when I would catch him on TV or on the radio or whatever the case may be. Because that was always something that I felt I lacked as a game caller for a number of years, and still something, to be honest, that I try to focus on work on to this day.
Spiro, thank you again for taking some time to be with us today and talk, of course, about all things Vin Scully. Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys. Always good to be back on FUV, and I wish you guys all the best. Hopefully we'll do it again soon.
We'll be right back here on One on One. Bruce Springsteen bringing us back here on One on One, remembering Vin Scully, Sam Davis, Ryan Gregoire. First of all, huge credit to Spiro Dedes for joining us from Greece, from a vacation, taking some time. It was really late at night it was during the day for us, but late at night with the time change for him, taking some time to talk about Vin Scully. And I think that just obviously shows all of these, bigger names, just like Spiro and everybody that we've interviewed, taking time out of their day, taking time out of even their vacation to sit down and talk about Vin, shows how much they mean to each one of these individuals.
100%. And we're so lucky that, we're, I guess, the benefactors of getting to talk to them and getting the avenue where they can talk about Vin Scully. And it just perfectly sums up the kind of man he was, because these people, it doesn't matter what they have going on. I think Bob Costas calling at midnight. I think Spiro Dedes on vacation late at night in Greece, across the world. It didn't matter. They found time for Vin Scully.
Now, a little bit later, we're going to hear from Ryan Rucco, of course, Yankees broadcaster. And, after that, it's going to be the end of the show with the three of us, me, you, and Mike, talking. And it's crazy how fast this show has gone by, like you've talked about. And it feels like we haven't even gotten into so much with Vin Scully, just because of, his life and his career and just how much that encapsulates. I want to go back to a couple things that I found interesting looking over Vin's life, especially early on. We mentioned that he was a Fordham baseball player, that he spent time playing Fordham baseball. And he actually said he used to call games while he was playing the outfield of his own team. So he was watching the game as it was going on, and he was calling the action. And that struck me because as a baseball player growing up for me in high school, I used to do the same thing as a aspiring broadcaster. So it was really cool to hear something like that from Vin, as he was always thinking about his career as a broadcaster. He said it started really young, obviously watching the Giants lose. They got blown out by the Yankees in the 1936 World Series. He was 8 years old. From then, he just had a love affair with the game of baseball. He loved the Giants, obviously started calling games for the Dodgers, but still loved the Giants as a young kid, went to Fordham, and just being in that spot. And I think, Mike said it a little bit earlier, sometimes it's really important to sit here and think, Vin Scully was in our shoes, walking around Fordham campus, obviously setting up the station at WFUV, and that's a really powerful idea to think about.
It's one of those just like, you take a step back and you're like, this is bigger than me. This is bigger than anything you could imagine, because growing up, it's Vin Scully and it's nobody else. And then when you get to that point where you're trying to become, obviously aspiring broadcaster, to be like, wow, Vin Scully stepped here. Vin Scully called games here. Vin Scully, just to be able to say that, it really adds another level to what you're doing. And obviously we're so appreciative of everything we do at Fordham. That just adds to it. And if we could go back to whatever year that was when he was in center, I would love those tapes, because I'm sure he was the same guy calling the game in center as he was in 1965 Koufax or in 2016 Clayton Kershaw.
A little bit later, we're going to get into all of the bigger calls that we've heard throughout Scully's career and really just sit down and, break them down a little bit and talk about how special each one was for a number of different reasons. But I want to go back to his first call, his first game. Very interesting story, something I did not know. Obviously, we've heard about Red Barber. We've heard a lot about him. He was the guy that went out and recruited Vin. He was the guy that really, was the first guy to, send a flyer out for Vin Scully for some college football coverage with CBS. He called a Maryland and BU football game from Fenway Park. I think it's winter, so it's cold. He was expecting to be in the press box, like one would expect, calling a game. Instead, he's on the roof of the stadium, so he's on top of Fenway Park. No coat, no gloves. He didn't bring any because he thought he would be in the press box. He's calling this game. not only does he not let it get to him, but he delivers such a good call that Red Barber is, obviously incredibly impressed, and just a few months later decides to have him on some Dodgers broadcasts. I mean, the rest is history. He's calling World Series game at 25, the youngest to ever do that still to this day, which I think is just really cool. And it struck me, that story, because even someone like Vin Scully, a huge name like that, an icon, started in throwing into the fire, throwing into circumstances that he was uncomfortable with, I'm sure. And the fact that he was able to just still nail the call in that pressure and in that kind of environment where he didn't know what was going to happen next as a young kid starting off, I think is very encouraging, for all of us and for every young broadcaster starting out, that it starts that similar way. It starts with, you're kind of just uncomfortable and thrown into a situation and you have to react. That's what Vin Scully did, and that's how he started his career.
Yeah, in some aspects, it's hard to find relatable moments with Vin just because
it's very hard.
But that is one where it's like, okay, we've all done stuff like that. I remember I called a basketball game. I think I had pink eye, and I thought I'm this warrior out there. But in reality, that's, going through even as little adversity of that. It's something that Vin Scully went through, and I think the story goes where he called that game on the roof. You couldn't even tell, like there was from his voice, from, his cadence, from everything about him calling the game, there was no way of even knowing that he was probably, super, super cold and couldn't think of anything else.
I'm sure he was nervous, too. I mean, at that point in his career, obviously, this is his first big chance.
I didn't even think of the nerves. Yeah. And that, it's funny because that's all we think about when everything's perfect going around us. But to battle that, to battle the cold, it's just another testament to it didn't matter. He was going to put on a show with every single call.
Yeah, Vin Scully just found a way to kind of step up in all of those big moments. Next, we're going to hear from Ryan Ruocco, Yankees broadcaster. Ryan, another really interesting perspective, another great perspective. We have so many interviews that I feel almost bad putting Ryan Ruocco here near the end of the show. Such a important figure, obviously, for WFUV and for the Yankees and for broadcasting as a whole. But we will hear from him on the other side of this break. So stick around. We have Ryan Ruocco coming up before we finish off the show, me, Ryan, and Mike. But next we'll have a break, and then Ryan Ruocco. Stay listening here to One on One.
New York's longest-running sports call-in show, remembering the life and legacy of Vin Scully this evening. With Danny Scott, I'm Colin Loughran, and we're now joined by FUV alum, Yankees and Nets play-by-play man for the Yes Network, Ryan Ruocco. Ryan, how are you doing today?
I'm good, man. I appreciate you guys doing this show, putting this on for Vin, and appreciate you giving me the opportunity to contribute.
Of course, we're so grateful to have you with us. Obviously, Vin was a huge part of FUV's early history and journey towards the living entity it is today. I've come to understand he may have led a workshop during your time at Fordham. Could you speak about the kind of impact his work in the booth had on you and other young broadcasters that called FUV home?
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, for so many people who were students of FUV during the time of Bob Ahrens, Bob was very close with Vin, and a lot of Bob's broadcasting philosophy was shaped by Vin. And so, not only did we have direct access to Vin through Bob, but we also had this vessel of Bob Ahrens to Vin's teaching. And obviously that's now continued in the aftermath of Bob with Bobby C and what you guys are doing at FUV now. And so there's definitely a feeling of, Vin's influence being felt beyond just his direct words. But then he did also make himself available to us. And his workshop, there's so many different things that I remember from his workshop that he did with us. But I think the point is a paramount one. And it's that, you can't be, the best Daniel Scott. Colin, you can't, right? Only Daniel can. And Daniel, you can't be the best Colin. Only Colin can. And there's an authenticity that comes with a comfort in being yourself in the booth. And the audience picks up on that, especially when you're going to be in the booth as much as you are when you're going to be a play-by-play broadcaster. And the audience gets to know you. And I think it's you need to sound authentic. And then you also need to, in order to be good, you need to be comfortable. And being yourself is the only way to achieve those two things. So that piece of advice from Vin that he shared with us, that Bob would share with us as well, that Red Barber shared with him, I always think about, and to this day, is one of the two foundational pieces of advice I always share with young broadcasters.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you could maybe tell us a little personal story that you and Vin had that you'd be willing to share with us and all the listeners.
Yeah, so when I was a senior in college, it was the first ever FUV Spring Gala. And the Vin Scully Award, Lifetime Achievement Award, was being given to Vin Scully as the first ever recipient. And Bob, knowing that I was our lead play-by-play guy as a senior, he arranged for me to be Vin's usher, if you will, for the evening. So I got to basically be with Vin, help him around throughout the entire night. And that meant Vin also wanting to spend, some time off alone, because at that point he was, I don't know, maybe he was mid 80s at that point. I'm trying to think what year. He was 94 now in 2022. So he was 80, and he was moving around fine, but he just, he did plenty of the cocktail hour type conversation and was ready for a break. So he said, Brian, how about me and you find a little area to sit down and talk for a minute? So I'm his, escort usher for the night. So I get to go, find a bank of couches, and it's just me and Vin Scully talking for 45 minutes, just the two of us. He tells me a lot of different useful things, but some of the things that I often recite, and my wife knows well because of how often I say it to her and she laughs, is he said to me, Ryan, there's nothing glamorous about getting into a hotel room at 3 a.m. after flying cross country and being away from your family. People think this business is glamorous, but it's not. And I always remember that. And I do have that feeling now. And part of his point was also, you have to love the job. Like, you can't be in it for the glamour. It's not actually glamorous. What it is really fun if you love it, and for me, that is the case. And for Vin, that obviously was the case. And then another thing he said, Brian, what you'll find the longer you're in this business is the older you are, the more they pay you to do less. You'll get paid way more to do a whole lot less. And I'm waiting for that part to kick in, but I am very much excited for it when it does. And of course, Vin just had a way of delivering these sort of axioms. I think that, I saw one of the stories circulating was when he talked about Madison Bumgarner and his wife finding these live birds in a dead rattlesnake and saving one of the birds after they found the eggs, just like him doing that in the midst of a 5-pitch walk followed by a single effortlessly. But he would do that kind of thing all the time. And I don't remember it well enough to recite completely, but that he told, I believe, not during a broadcast, but when he did the commencement address at Fordham, was him calling a former classmate, teammate at Fordham's home run in the major leagues. And the just chills of hearing Vin tell that story and thinking back to their time together at Fordham was just incredible. But he had that ability. And in baseball, you need that, right? Like baseball broadcasts are driven by the stories, not the action. And there was no better storyteller in the history of sports broadcasting than Vin Scully.
Yeah, kind of keeping on with that theme, what do you think separated him and made him the best, and in my opinion, the best all-time broadcaster?
I think that Vin had, to that point about being yourself, a very unique style where, you know, he was so authentically himself. And, you know, you'd never say, oh, Vin sounded like, well, Vin didn't sound like anybody else. Vin sounded like Vin. And I think that's a huge part of what made him excellent, was him sounding so uniquely like himself. I think that, you know, some of the other things that stood out was his, not just his unique ability to tell a story that you haven't heard before, and the way that he would tell it so that you'd remember it, but also sort of the earnest sound in his voice. You know, you listen to Vin Scully talk and you're just like, this is a good man, you know, and it's not, I don't think that's an easy thing to convey. Even as I say it, if I was to say, what does it sound like to sound like a good man? The only way I could really describe it is to say, it sounds like Vin Scully. You know, you just listen to him talk and you just say, that is a, you know, kind, righteous, good-hearted person. Somehow in his voice, he was able to convey that. And I think that also allowed for his audience to feel more connected to him. Not just because he was the vessel to the team that they loved, but because he had this very unique, good-natured sound that they could sense, that sort of was a window into his soul, and that he shared with them every summer night.
You touched on it there. You know, while it's incredible to reflect on the life of Vin Scully, the broadcaster, over the past couple of days, we've had, you know, just as much, if not more, come out about Vin Scully, the man. Ryan, what can you say, if anything, about the type of person Vin was?
Well, the only thing, you know, my interactions with Vin were incredible, and he could not have been more gracious with his time or more kind. And I think that, you know, when you are talking about someone who is famous and has a lot of demands on them, and that's a hero of yours, that's all you can ask for, right? Is for them to, you know, for you to come away from those interactions saying, wow, like they were so generous with their time, and they were so kind and engaging, and Vin was all of those things. But then, excuse me, then you think about it from the standpoint of somebody who does really know him, and that's Bob Ahrens. And the way I would see Vin be with Bob, and Vin's wife with Bob as well, and the way they would treat him, the kindness, the way they'd open their home to him, the way Vin would just give him 30 minutes on the phone, the way he was always there for Bob and for the program, for anything we needed, you know, the same way you suspected him being that kind of person, just hearing the tone of his voice. The actions I saw to people who really knew him showed that to me as well.
Yeah, kind of my final question, a similar question. What legacy is Vin Scully leaving behind in the world of baseball?
Well, I think it's interesting because one of the things Vin used to say, and he said it on the workshop, is, you know, you don't ever want to get too close with any of the players you're covering, because the day is going to come where you have to criticize them, and it's harder to criticize a friend. And I think he had a couple cautionary tales of that from early in his career. But the irony is, everybody he covered loved him, and they loved him because of I think the way he told their stories, the way he allowed the fan to feel connected to the player because of the stories he told. I think also because you could see he just loved baseball. To me, when you ask that question of his legacy for baseball, it's Vin Scully is everything that's good about baseball. It's about the familiarity, the feeling of this being a part of your summer, this being in the background of your summer nights, the feeling of remembering where you were when you heard the call, the feeling of this person hanging out with you in your living room and feeling like you know them, even if you've never met them. And Vin Scully was the ultimate champion of the sport and the things that we treasure most about the essence of baseball. And so when I think about Vin, I think of him from a broadcasting standpoint as setting the standard that we will all strive for yet never reach. I think about the generosity he showed to all of us in the business. And then I think about the love he had for me and the way everybody would feel that, and how he really embodied what was best about the sport. And I know that as long as they play the game of baseball, they will talk about Vin Scully.
Brian, we know you're a busy man, so we're going to let you go here. Thank you so much for joining us in remembering the life and legacy of Vin Scully, a truly great broadcaster, an even greater man. Everyone, stay tuned to One on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show.
Which I'm certain I've lived a life that's full. I traveled each and every highway and more, much more than this. I did it my way. Regrets, I've had a few, but then again, too few to mention. I did what I had to do and saw it through without exemption. I planned each charted course, each careful step along the byway, and more, much more than this, I did it my way. Yes, there were times, I'm sure you knew, when I bit off more than I could chew. But through it all, when there was doubt, I ate it up and spit it out. I faced it all, and I stood tall and did it my way. I've loved, I've laughed and cried, I've had my fill, my share of losing, and now.
Back here on One on One, talk about iconic voices. We're talking about Vin Scully, Frank Sinatra. Oh my goodness, I could listen to that song on repeat for the rest of the night.
I think it's a great way to end the show.
Oh, great way to end the show. Final segment, an iconic show for the legend Vin Scully. We want to hear from you all. 718-817-2750. Any impressions from Vin Scully? I'm sure you have plenty of them. We would love to hear it if anyone would like to call in here as we wrap up on our final segment. I wanted to, guys, break down some of the bigger moments from Vin Scully's career in terms of those calls, the calls that we talked about him nailing, just stepping up and really delivering a great call. It starts with, the first one I want to bring up is Don Larson, perfect game, 1956 World Series. A perfect game in the World Series.
It's happened one time.
We talked about moments that Vin Scully's made for. That's it right there. And I think something that stood out to me about that particular call is the fact that it came against the Dodgers, a team that he's been covering, a team that, he probably has the closest connection to, obviously, and his heart is probably obviously willing for the Dodgers. But the fact that he's able to deliver that call in support of the Yankees against the Dodgers in such a big moment, I think points to, something Red Barber really, put on Vin Scully from the moment that he started in his career, was about being unbiased, was about really being objective and calling the game how he sees it. That's something that Vin Scully did excellently throughout his career. Despite 67 years with the Dodgers, he was still able to rise to the occasion in those big moments, be objective, and really just be the true broadcaster.
There was a moment after the team moved to Los Angeles, I'm sure, we read up on this story, where they asked him when they moved, could you be more pro-Dodgers as we try to generate a fan base on the West Coast? He said no. He said he was going to stay being objective no matter what, and that's what he did. You talk about that moment, his team that he's been calling, that he loves, they got perfect games in the World Series, but you couldn't tell that it was, the opposition. He made every call. It didn't matter the team.
Yeah, I think back to that, his call. I know we're going to mention it when Hank Aaron breaks the home run record, and it really felt like he was more of a fan of baseball than anything else, and I think that was important. And you think back to all those calls that, as much as he loved his Dodgers, he was always unbiased, and he always served the baseball fan more than maybe he served the Dodger fan, but he also served the Dodger fan a lot, and I think he just was able to do everything the right way, which I think is what makes Vin Scully Vin Scully.
Mike, you got the Brooklyn Dodgers hat on. I had to shout that. I just noticed as I was watching you speak.
So I threw it on. I had not had it on throughout the show. I wanted to wear it, but then I was like, you know what? I'll wear the polo. I'll try to look official, but then throw it on for the final segment. We're talking Vin Scully.
You gotta throw it
on. And as much as he was part of the Los Angeles Dodgers, the same franchise when it was in Brooklyn, that's where he made a start. So I guess that's where Vin Scully was first brought into all the Dodgers, fans' lives, and I think that's what made him, really set his mark. And then he transitioned then to LA. So I do have the Dodgers hat. That is correct.
Love the Dodgers hat. From one perfect game to another, of course, Sandy Koufax. We brought that up before. Something, I think I talked about it a little bit earlier in the show, Ryan, is that he just had a sense of when the moment was big. And obviously with a perfect game, that's a huge call. You have to nail it. But just the fact to take the maturity and step back and say the time, the date, the amount of fans in attendance, all of those little details, he does those so perfectly, does those so well, that just makes the moment extra special. It makes you feel like you're there.
And I do want to add this because I was reading up about that, or I was watching an interview on him, and he said that he originally didn't do that for dramatic effect, that he wanted the timestamp for Sandy Koufax, for his family, for his friends, so they knew when it happened, and they could hear it on broadcast. And that's why he announces the time, but he said after it happened, people told him that it added so much to the broadcast, the fact that they could feel the time. It was there.
9:46.
Yes, 9:46 p.m. and then he does 47. Yeah, so like that was really, it helps you feel like you're there. But it's crazy how he was thinking about Sandy Koufax in that moment. He was thinking about his family, that he wanted to give the time for them. And it just so happened that the way he came across giving the time, that he was doing it so great that it became part of the moment more so than anything for Sandy Koufax's family.
Yeah, if there's a world out there where you're listening to this and you haven't seen just that whole ninth inning, I believe MLB Network has it archived and on.
It's on YouTube.
Channel. It's like a 7-minute 40.
It's about it's just like that whole inning, and there was no.
Yes, that's what I was going to bring up. What's great about it? There's no video.
Yep.
It's just pictures, but you've never felt more in the moment. You've never felt like you had a more visual look of what's going on, despite just the pictures, because of just the master class that he painted.
Because every single detail is just, illustrated to perfection. I mean, he talks about wiping the sweat from his brow.
With the index finger, I think it is, yeah.
Yeah, of course, Mike. You know this whole thing. I mean, he wipes it on his pants. He adjusts his belt. Every little detail.
I like in that one where he says, like, that's the first time Sandy threw more than he pitched. And like the way he says it, it's like,
that's something
there.
A color guy says.
Yeah.
And that's something that Vin says in that moment, because obviously he's by himself in that booth. And that's like an in-depth analysis of baseball that he's able to provide in such a big moment like that.
And I think the biggest thing that he was able to bring to that moment is that although there is no video of it, there is no camera, you don't need it, because that's how well he paints the picture. And, we talk about it all the time. I'm not going to try to say it like Vin, but the 2-2 to Harvey Keene, that's amazing. The way he...
You could try and... No, you don't have to. It's a little...
a lot of pressure. We've already heard some great impressions.
No, I did a lot behind the glass before
we all
the
did.
breaks.
We all did. I've heard 2-2 to Harvey Keene like going in my head like all day long.
Well, I always tell the story. I remember I wasn't even old enough to know who Vin Scully was, but it would just be walking around the house and that would be randomly said at all times. And I didn't even know who Harvey Keene was at that time.
I still don't know.
I didn't even know what the call was attached to. to it. Just the fact that he said the way he said it, just the elegance. It felt like he was singing every time he spoke, and I think just added to how great he made that moment and every moment he called.
Hank Aaron home run record 1974, another huge call, another huge moment. It was just it just happened to be that the Braves were playing the Dodgers, and of course Vin Scully was there.
And you don't usually hear Vin's call because you think of the one where it's like there's a new home run king.
Yes,
and that's the one I knew. And when I listened to Vin's call, I thought it was different, but it was just as special.
Yeah, there's a couple moments like that. There's a couple moments like that where there's
and
other
the Kirk Gibson.
The Kirk Gibson is the same exact one. That's what I was alluding to. It's another great call, that one by Jack Buck, but. You go back to Vin and you think, okay, that's also an awesome call. That also is just a perfect call. They kind of like a lot of editing goes into that. From what I've heard of that call, it's Hank Aaron hits the home run. Vin Scully said it's gone. And then you hear Vin Scully say the iconic line that a black man is getting a standing ovation in the Deep South. And just a perfect line, first of all, with, more than just baseball and how big that moment was.
Transcending baseball is something that he no doubtably did throughout his career. That moment, so much more important for the history of America. I know, American baseball tied to the hip, especially in that 19th century with Jackie Robinson breaking the color barrier. All of that, for that moment, for him to, you think about the home run, your passing records, everything like that, but in the back of your mind to realize that this isn't just a baseball moment. This is an American history moment. He was able to do that. He's able to deliver the line after he leaves the press box. We brought it up earlier, Sam. Leaves the press box in the middle of the call, yet it's the best part of the call. And it's, it's nothing to do without him talking. It's just the essence of the crowd was truly captured in that moment.
I think before I just want to stay on this call. I think another great thing about it is he knows he's a one-man booth, but he knows the crowd is, his companion. He knows that. And I think about myself, broadcasting baseball games in the spring. I always felt that, I always need to be speaking. There always need to be some sort of voice on the call. But, what I learned from watching these calls of Vin Scully, he knew that the crowd noise, he knew that the crowd itself was just as important as anything he might be able to say in the moment. And in that Hank Aaron home run, he lets the crowd just play out for a minute or so, and I think that just elevates the call. And then when he does come back, he's collected, and he gives it that great speech that he gives about Hank Aaron breaking the home run.
And yeah, Mike, I was about to say that as a young broadcaster, you almost feel the pressure to speak. You feel the pressure to say, okay, this is my job. I have to say something. I have to come up with the, perfect encapsulation of what just happened. But you don't have to do that sometimes. Sometimes you can be in that moment and just let that crowd noise really carry you through. And then obviously he's still able to deliver such a, an impactful line. I think Vin, you always think of Vin Scully as the baseball announcer, and rightfully so, with all the years and all the love of baseball that he has. But he's got another big moment outside of the game of baseball, in football, the NFC Championship 1981. The catch is what it's called, the San Francisco 49ers. Just an unbelievable catch by Dwight Clark, Joe Montana, rolling right in the NFC Championship game. Vin Scully on the call there. A really cool quote that I pulled that I love from that call is Dwight Clark is 6'4". He stands about 10 feet tall in this crowd's estimation. He says that just with so much ease, like it. I think it was said earlier as well, is that it would take you months to write down everything that Vin Scully said, like you were writing a book, and just put that all together. Vin was able to do that in the moment. He did that once again with just another iconic call.
And I brought this up before, I think, during one of the interviews. It's you think about everything he did in the game of baseball, then it's like, oh, yeah, he also got the catch.
Yeah.
Like unbelievable
Casually
career.
yeah.
And I believe the way it went, he was in contention for the Super Bowl call that year. He didn't get it. This was his consolation prize. I don't know if you put the NFC Championship game as a consolation. And this was the last game he called. He stopped calling football after that. So he went out in style. I think he said
dropped the mic there.
If there's a way to quit calling football, it's with that call and that catch.
Yeah, and I think that was actually his last football game he ever called. I believe so. That's the case, that he left his mark on the NFL with that call and with that broadcast of that game. And it really didn't need football. I mean, I think his mark was in baseball, but the fact that he was able to go into all these different sports. We talked about it before, and he was calling basketball games. He was calling football games before he even got to baseball. He's a tremendous broadcaster. He didn't always need to do baseball. He could do any sport, really, but baseball is where he left his mark, really.
Baseball is where he left his mark. Two more, quick calls, and I'll group him together as Bill Buckner, his big-time era, Game 6 of the 1986 World Series. The Mets, obviously huge at-bat from Mookie Wilson. They win Game 7. A really difficult, and I would say a difficult call because of how crazy that moment was. It was a wild pitch. It was an error. It was, all of that played together into such a game with such high stakes. Vin handled it with ease, obviously was able to nail that call as well, and just kind of feeling the shock like the rest of the audience, everyone else listening, kind of just reflecting that shock in his voice.
But there's also, there's a moment where broadcasters, like if something unexpected happens, you go too high, your octanes, you go too high with your voice. He didn't. He was able to keep that, and I know there was definitely a shock in his voice, but it was still calming in the sense where he was ready for the air. You talk about knowing when the moment's coming, and you never expect the ball to go through Bill Buckner's legs, but it's not that he expected it, it's that he was ready. His voice was set up, the play was set up perfectly to where anything could have happened and he still would have nailed the call, and obviously he nailed the call.
And I think back to, when my uncle was at, Fordham University at WFUV, he used to talk about Marty Glickman and how he used to tell him, be exciting, not excited when you make the big call. And I think that demonstrates how Vin Scully was. He didn't sound like he was over the moon when these things happened, but he was exciting to see him describe the play. I think that was what made him so special, that he was always a storyteller, and he always made it exciting for the fan, and he never, got too carried away, but he always described it perfectly. That's what made him amazing.
In a year that has been so improbable, the impossible has happened. I mean, that
and
line...
he waited to deliver that line,
He waited to deliver that line. Kirk Gibson, pinch hit homer, Game 1, 1988 World Series. Most people say his greatest call. I would say probably two. I mean, watching it over, obviously there's so many, it's hard to pick. But just an
there's
unbelievable
so many
call.
We don't even know. Maybe
we don't even know.
Archives of Brooklyn, of Los Angeles,
between the cracks
before the TV, and there's so many. The only reason we have the perfect game by obviously Sandy Koufax is probably someone was taping it because they saw that he's throwing a perfect game. We have to tape this game. You think about Shot Heard Around the World. It was a student that taped that final inning of the game, and if that student wasn't taping it, we would not have that call. So you think about how that was back in the day where there weren't recorded archives of games. So it's like there are legendary calls that probably people remember, but we don't really have to pull up.
Yeah, and Ryan and Mike, just one more quick thing, obviously, about Vin Scully and about FUV. And I know, we've done a lot to honor him throughout this show. The connection to him, the connection to our alumni, it's been an incredible show, and just the opportunity to speak on Vin and his unbelievable career, his unbelievable life has been such a blessing.
It's been such an honor, and it's undoubtable that we wouldn't be here without Vin. And
Yes.
It doesn't matter that we never met him or anything like that. His touch on our lives, and I know specifically like the impact that he's had on me and not knowing him at all, it's really remarkable. And just hearing about the person he was on top of that, how proud he makes me to go to Fordham University, just knowing that he was in this position, it's almost hard to put into words, Sam and Mike, but such a special person, such a special human being, and so blessed that, we were able to share, I guess, this type of connection with him.
Yeah, and I think to be able to walk the halls, I guess for me personally, being for Fordham Prep, where obviously Vin Scully was, you always knew the name Vin Scully, even when you were just a high school student there at Fordham Prep. I have Fordham Prep buddies that would, text me when, Vin Scully passed away earlier this week. He was that kind of legend. You didn't even go to Fordham. You didn't even go to WFUV. You didn't need to be a Dodger fan. It was Vin Scully. He transcended all that, and that makes him really a legend of all of our lives. And, I'm honored to be able to walk the same halls he did at Fordham and be a part of WFUV. So, I'm really proud, like Ryan says, to be a part of this radio station, and it's all because of Vin Scully.
An awesome show. Thank you to Pat Imatoro, Julia Moss behind the glass, Mike Calamari, and Ryan Gregoire here for all their time and effort in the studio, setting up a very special edition of One-on-One for Vin Scully. A shout out to Bobby Chaffardini, the sports director at WFUV. He was a big help with our guests for today. As always, One-on-One is a production of WFUV Sports. I want to say thank you to those who helped us out with our interviewers, Danny Scott, Andrew Galata, Colin Loughran, Thomas Aiello, and FUV alum DJ Sixsmith. All of our guests, Bob Ahrens, Malcolm Moran, Michael Kay, Tony Reali, John Cirillo, Spiro Dedes, Ryan Rucco, and Bob Costas. All of these names speaking about the life and legacy of Vin shows how influential he was for WFUV Sports, the game of baseball, and our nation as a whole. For one final thanks, it's for you, Vin. Every broadcast for 67 years, you greeted us with a pleasant smile and asked us to pull up a chair, to listen and to learn. You were there for all the big moments in baseball, and you nailed the call every single time. You gave millions of fans memories they will never forget. But for us at WFUV, you were more than that. You were the man who made all of this possible. Through the founding of WFUV, you've inspired generations of broadcasters that continues to this very day and beyond. And for that reason, Vin, you will always remain in our minds and in our hearts. As you said countless times, we wish you, Vin, a very pleasant good afternoon wherever you may be. Rest in peace, the great Vin Scully.
This is WFUV, New York.
Online and always commercial free.
Laugh in the sunshine, sing along.